On a busy street, cars sped through a crowded intersection. Death came to the MC so suddenly that he could never have imagined it. As he stepped into the crosswalk, memories of his college days surfaced, reminding him that he had not submitted his report. He remembered his best friend and his ex-boss from his part-time job. He remembered everyone at the orphanage as well. Thanks to them, his life had not been all bad. Even so, if possible, he still wanted to be alive. An unforeseen start came when a truck suddenly came barreling toward him. The MC woke up on the ground, looking shocked. All he could see were trees. Slowly, he stood while holding his chest and breathing heavily. He looked around, wondering if this was the underworld. If so, he must really be dead. There was only forest around him. He saw no Sanzu River or flower gardens, and it looked nothing like what he had been told. His stomach grumbled. He was starving. When he noticed something nearby, he picked it up and realized it was a leaf. He began chewing it, wondering why he was eating a leaf in the first place. He must have been that hungry. At this rate, he might die again from starvation. He needed to find something to eat. Suddenly, he noticed a big insect moving nearby. It looked edible enough. He slowly reached out his hand and picked up a stone. Starving seemed worse than whatever he was about to do. He killed the insect and wondered whether it would taste better fried, because eating it raw felt terrible. Later, he dipped his head into a nearby river. Afterwards, he felt much better. As he thought about the moment the truck had slammed into him, he still could not understand what had happened. He was almost certain that he had died because of that truck. He looked down at the flowing water, only to see an unfamiliar face reflected on its surface. He wondered who that person was. Shock spread through him as the possibility occurred to him that he really had died and been reborn as another person. It was the popular manga theme of being reborn in another world, or perhaps he had merely possessed someone else's body. He lay on the ground, thinking that perhaps he was only dreaming. If he opened his eyes again, maybe he would find himself in a hospital. If he was lucky, perhaps the truck had not hit him very hard after all. The next day, he knelt on the ground in the middle of the forest. This was real life. Everything remained the same when he woke up. He decided that he would prepare for anything necessary to survive. He also thought that he looked handsome, despite everything. Afterwards, he searched for information in case he would never be able to return to Japan. It was the only option he had for now. First, he needed to find something to eat. If only he could find some people. Unfortunately, the jungle seemed to have nothing. The MC walked alone through the forest, managing to survive by eating nothing but bugs. Then, suddenly, he heard a voice addressing him as a human boy. The MC was surprised that someone was speaking. He felt lucky, only for a bird-like creature to appear before him. He was shocked and explained that he was lost. The bird-like creature informed him that this was its territory and ordered him to leave. The MC's eyes widened. He tried to make himself seem unappealing as food, knowing that he was mostly bones with very little flesh. He had only eaten a centipede the previous day, and he desperately begged the creature not to eat him. He had just been reborn and did not want to die here. The creature explained that it had its own standards for eating and did not want to eat the MC anyway. It then questioned what the MC thought it was. The MC apologized, realizing that he had not meant to offend it. He intended to leave anyway, so he bid farewell and ran away. He could hardly believe what had just happened. He had been thrown into this world with an empty stomach, forced to eat centipedes and live inside another body, only to encounter a griffin while trying to find a way to survive. He could not understand why this world was so abnormal and desperately wanted to get out of there. Suddenly, the griffin landed in front of him. It reminded him that it had already made clear that this was its territory, including the depths of the jungle. That was the pact, and the MC had dared to search for food within its territory. The MC fell backward onto the ground. He apologized to the griffin, explaining that he was lost and had not known that the area belonged to it. The griffin called him a liar. It had made this pact with humans for 200 years, and even a child would have known about it. It then demanded that the MC explain his reason for being there and promised to let him live if the explanation was reasonable. The MC thought he was going to die. He could only tell the truth, though he did not know whether the griffin would believe him. He revealed that he was actually possessing this body. The griffin was surprised by the revelation. The MC could only think about the fact that he was actually dead, truly and completely dead. He knelt and explained that he did not know this jungle and did not even know whose body this was. He begged the griffin to believe him. The griffin remained skeptical before considering that the MC might be a wanderer. If that was the case, it made sense that the MC would not know anything. The griffin then apologized. The MC was shocked. The griffin regarded him as miserable for having been thrown into such a faraway land. It explained that he had to become familiar with this world. He could hate his destiny as much as he wanted, but nothing would change. The MC asked what a wanderer was, and the griffin explained that wanderers were people from other worlds who had been reborn there. The MC clarified that he had not been born there. The Griffin was confused, so the MC told it everything. After hearing the explanation, the Griffin admitted that it had no idea what had happened to him. It had never heard of such a case, though it had met some wanderers 500 years ago, and none of them had been like the MC. Even so, the Griffin was certain that he was still a wanderer, a kind of reborn person. The Griffin then pointed out that the MC had said he had become a kid, which meant he had originally been an adult. The MC confirmed that this was true, though he was now like this, and he wondered whether that was a problem. The Griffin agreed to let the MC go on one condition. It wanted the MC to do something. In the forest, there was a cave where the MC and the Griffin had gone inside. Upon entering, the MC wondered about what he was seeing. The Griffin made him realize that the sight before him should have been enough to explain the situation. Inside the cave were many humans facing them. According to the Griffin, they were the same race as the MC. The MC noticed that many of them were children and counted 30 people in total. The Griffin had no idea why there were so many of them. Lately, humans had been abandoning children in its forest. Thinking about it, the MC realized that the starving state of his own body might have been the result of the same fate. Perhaps he, too, had been abandoned because of famine. He then understood that the Griffin wanted him to take care of the children. The Griffin confirmed that he had understood quickly and wanted him to look after them until they were able to walk on their own. The MC did not hate children. He had also grown up in an orphanage, so he could sympathize with them. However, the problem of feeding so many children remained. He wondered if the real issue was the shortage of food. The Griffin assured him that it would supply enough food for everyone for 3 years. During that time, the children would have to learn how to find food for themselves. The MC was taken aback by this arrangement. Food was being provided for 3 years, after all. He realized that the Griffin was actually a good person, or rather, a good Griffin. Clenching his fist, the MC wondered why the Griffin had saved the children in the first place. The Griffin's reasoning was simple. If it had found them starving and without shelter, it could not simply abandon them or rescue them only to throw them away irresponsibly. Once it chose to save someone, it believed that it had to remain responsible for them until the very end. The MC finally realized something. Seeing the fruits in the nest, he wondered whether the Griffin had been the one bringing them there. Humans and Griffins were simply different. Perhaps the Griffin had made him take care of the children because it was worried about them but did not know how to raise humans. With that understanding, the MC accepted the responsibility of looking after all of them from then on. He considered it a wise choice. Turning toward the children, he noticed the others watching him with pouting expressions. He decided to introduce himself as their new leader and greeted them. The children in front of him only looked confused, unable to understand what he was saying. The MC smiled awkwardly as he suddenly realized the problem. There was a language barrier. He looked toward the Griffin and wondered about the language. The Griffin apologized, explaining that people from another world could not understand the language of their world and that it had nearly forgotten about that fact. The MC then wondered why he was able to communicate with the Griffin despite being from another world. The reason was his divine blessing of the divine world, which made it possible for him to communicate with other races. The MC was left speechless upon learning this. The divine blessing of the divine world allowed its owner to communicate with other races. The Griffin recognized that this was a problem and decided to lend the MC its own divine blessing for a while. The MC was shocked that such a blessing could even be borrowed. The Griffin explained that it was normally impossible, but it possessed another ability, the divine blessing of lending. This blessing allowed its owner to temporarily lend a blessing to another person. The MC wondered whether lending him the blessing would cause trouble for the Griffin. The Griffin clarified that it had no intention of lending him any of its precious divine blessings. Instead, it would only lend him the divine blessing of language. The divine blessing of language changed the user's voice and hearing to correspond with a different language. However, there was a limit to the number of languages that could be appointed for the change. The MC then wondered how many divine blessings the Griffin possessed in total. The Griffin revealed that it had 12. The MC was shocked by the number. Looking toward the girl, he wondered why the divine blessings seemed so cheap. Perhaps this was simply a special characteristic of the Griffin, or maybe possessing numerous blessings was common in that world. The Griffin explained that there were not many divine blessings that were actually useful. The divine blessing of language, for example, was practically useless to a Griffin because of the nature of its vocal organs. The Griffin then suggested that they try speaking to the others. Suddenly, the MC found himself speaking the language of the children. He asked them to treat him well and was shocked when the foreign language naturally came out of his mouth. A girl then approached him and respectfully greeted him. In her thoughts, she wondered whether she could call him Oniai-chan. The MC was amazed that he could understand everything she said. He realized that he could now understand their language completely. Suddenly, a boy pointed at him and asked for his name. The MC reminded him that he should introduce himself before asking someone else's name. The boy introduced himself as Ron and revealed that he was everyone's leader. He then aggressively insisted that since he had already given his name, the MC should give his own. The MC attempted to introduce himself but stopped and turned toward the Griffin. He quietly asked what name he should use if he wanted to sound like someone from that world. The Griffin suggested the name Almas. When the MC wondered what it meant, the Griffin explained that it simply sounded nice. The MC found the explanation rather lacking, but he accepted the name and introduced himself as Almas before greeting Ron. Ron immediately asked how old Almas was. Almas answered that he was 20. Ron was surprised by the answer because Almas looked younger than him. The Griffin confirmed that Almas was not lying and that his age was indeed 20. Ron reluctantly accepted it because the Griffin had confirmed it. Almas then suggested that everyone introduce themselves as well. Ron went first, giving his name and stating that he was 12 years old. The girl who had approached Almas earlier introduced herself as Soyeon and revealed that she was Ron's childhood friend. Another child introduced himself as Rosewood, 11 years old. Another girl introduced herself as Tetra, 10 years old, followed by another girl named Graham, also 10 years old. Another child introduced himself as Lulu, 10 years old. Almas realized that none of the children there were younger than 9. Ron then shouted at Almas, making it clear that despite Almas introducing himself, he still did not recognize him as their leader. Almas understood exactly what Ron was thinking. From Ron's perspective, someone had suddenly appeared and proclaimed himself their leader, but Almas realized that the situation was not so different from what they had experienced at the orphanage. Soyeon assured Almas that Ron did not mean any ill will and was simply somewhat stupid. Ron immediately reacted to her remark, questioning what she was doing and who she was calling stupid. Soyeon calmly pointed out that it was simply the truth. Ron retaliated by calling Soyeon stupid for calling him stupid, and the two continued bickering with each other. Almas thought about how all of them were children who had been abandoned, yet they seemed to be quite a lively bunch. Even so, he was certain that they were suffering on the inside. Determined to protect them, Almas promised everyone that he would definitely protect them. Tetra simply watched Almas without saying anything. Ron scoffed and challenged Almas to come up with a good idea if he intended to proclaim himself their leader. Almas realized that he needed a plan and decided that they would begin with agriculture. The children were surprised by Almas's decision to begin with agriculture, questioning whether he was truly serious about it. Almas vaguely remembered what agriculture involved, but he saw no other option. The Griffin would only support them for 3 years, meaning the 31 of them would eventually have to sustain themselves. Ron wondered whether farming was difficult and how they could possibly manage it. Almas realized that, as Ron had pointed out, they still had a long way to go. They were deep inside the jungle, where the trees grew densely. To create farmland, they would have to cut down part of the forest and remove the root. Once the trees were uprooted, the soil would become softer and suitable for cultivation. However, there was an unavoidable problem. They were all children. Almas wondered how many of them could even hold a pickaxe. Rosewood became discouraged by their situation and felt that they were trapped. Nothing about their circumstances seemed easy, making him wonder whether they should simply give up. He then turned to Tetra for agreement. The Griffin overheard them and made it clear that there was no other way. Soyeon then wondered what farming actually involved. Almas explained that they needed to obtain iron tools for farming because having proper iron tools would make everything much easier. Ron wondered what they should do next. Almas determined that they needed to trade. Ron pointed out that all their valuable belongings had already been consumed by the children. Almas smiled at the thought that they might still have some objects left. Unfortunately, those objects were not edible. Just then, the Griffin suddenly arrived carrying a large number of swords. It apologized for making them wait and presented the weapons to them. Almas was impressed by how quickly the Griffin had returned. He thanked it, realizing that they could now do something with the remaining objects. Ron and Rosewood were astonished by the sight of the swords and other weapons. Almas understood that these were the belongings left behind by people who had dared to challenge the Griffin. He already knew that there were people who wanted to subdue the Griffin, but the sheer number of weapons surprised him. The Griffin explained that the objects scattered throughout its forest irritated it. It told Almas to wait there because there were still more weapons remaining and it intended to bring them all over. The Griffin was simply pleased to finally get rid of the unburnable trash. Tetra wondered whether Almas intended to trade the weapons for farming tools. Almas confirmed that this was the plan and affectionately addressed her as Tetra-chan. He then attempted to rub Tetra's head, but she nearly slapped him. Ron suggested that they trade the weapons for food instead. Soyeon pointed out that once their food ran out, they would be left wondering whether they were supposed to eat grass. Ron had no answer to that. Soyeon then wondered whether all they needed to do was till the ground. Almas explained that they first needed to find soft soil suitable for cultivation. If they could not manage the work themselves, they would have to hire adults. He reasoned that using swords as payment would reduce the chances of encountering bad people. Almas also considered that, if such a situation arose, the Griffin would take care of it. The remaining problem was determining where they could trade the swords. Almas wondered whether anyone among them had expertise in that area. The girls looked sad and apologized, while Ron also admitted that he did not know. Soyeon, standing beside him, likewise apologized. Rosewood would rather die than tell Almas, prompting Almas to realize that he meant he simply did not know. Almas then turned toward Tetra. Tetra revealed that she knew and showed him a map. She explained that they were currently in the Ramalia jungle. The Rosice Kingdom was located to the east, while the Guild Kingdom lay to the northwest and the Demerga Kingdom to the northeast. The Faldarm Kingdom was located to the north. Using a stone, Tetra marked the locations on the map and explained the situation surrounding the kingdoms. Rosice was poor at producing iron tools, while Demerga and Guild were taking advantage of the famine to attack Faldarm. Almas immediately realized that this was their opportunity. The weapons they possessed were valuable, meaning they could potentially be sold for a high price. Almas wondered how Tetra knew all of this. Tetra then pointed out the obvious danger. The people they would be dealing with were adults, and they were capable of taking the children's weapons by force. Almas was not worried about the danger. He had already considered the possibility and had a way to deal with it. He showed the children a feather from the griffin, which immediately stunned Ron and Rosewood. They recognized it as Griffin Sama's feather. Almas instructed them to show the feather to the adults and claim that they were acting under the griffin's orders. With such proof, he was certain they would be able to make a deal. However, Almas also realized that he needed to properly consult the griffin about his plan. Rosewood was frightened by the thought. Almas then decided that they should not all travel together at once and asked for volunteers. Rosewood and Soyeon raised their hand. Almas selected them to go with Tetra. Tetra pointed out that she had never raised her hand. Almas reasoned that she was an expert in the area and, more importantly, the smartest among them. Tetra could only sigh deeply and close her eyes. The next day, in Domergan's territory, Almas and the children arrived at the market and displayed their weapons to the vendors. Almas confidently presented 10 steel swords and 6 bronze swords as items for trade. An old merchant leaned toward the weapons and recognized them as belonging to the griffin's messengers. 2 other merchants then informed the old man that the smith had arrived. The elder explained something to the 2 merchants before turning his attention back to Almas, who continued smiling confidently. The elder was impressed by the quality of the swords and asked what Almas wanted in exchange for them. Almas and the children looked enthusiastic, with the exception of Tetra. Almas then presented their requested trade: 10 iron pickaxes, 3 hatchets, and 8 sickles. Later, while returning to the forest, Ron remained amazed by how many tools they had managed to obtain by trading the swords, especially considering how valuable iron was. Soyeon wondered whether they had received too little in exchange. Tetra pointed out that all of their weapons were made of iron and believed they should have demanded a higher price. Almas explained that they were the negotiators, so it was better for them to begin with a low price. He also intended for them to return to the market later. As they continued toward the forest, Almas began thinking about what they needed to do next. With his vague knowledge of agriculture, he understood that farming alone would not be enough. They would also need to hunt, gather, and fish. Fortunately, the griffin could provide meat and leather for them to sell. Still, Almas had no idea where they should begin. He needed to determine where they could farm, whether they could simply cut down the trees, and whether doing so would anger the griffin. Almas brought his entire plan to the griffin and asked for its permission. The griffin assured him that it was fine. Its territory was located deep inside the jungle, and aside from that area, Almas could do whatever he wanted. The griffin then remembered that people had lived in the area about 30 years earlier. The place had eventually been abandoned because of an epidemic, and the people had come to believe that the griffin had cursed the area. The griffin considered the abandonment a waste. Almas wondered why the griffin had not mentioned the place earlier and asked where it was. The griffin admitted that too much time had passed and that it no longer remembered the exact location clearly. The griffin then instructed Almas to climb onto its back, explaining that they would have a wider view from above the ground. Almas was surprised by the idea of going above the ground. Before he could properly prepare himself, the griffin suddenly flew toward the sky. Almas became terrified and clung tightly to the griffin, even considering giving up on the search altogether. The griffin warned him not to touch it randomly. Almas then worried about what would happen if he needed to urinate. The griffin responded that it would simply kick him off. As they continued flying, the griffin spotted something ahead and recognized the location as the place they were looking for. Almas held on tightly as the griffin accelerated and soared at full speed over the village. From above, Almas saw broken walls, collapsed structures, and empty streets stretching across the abandoned settlement. The griffin then descended and landed on the ground. Almas struggled to stand after the flight. The griffin explained that, compared to reclaiming the land from scratch, it would be more convenient to make use of what was already naturally available. Almas agreed and decided to inspect the area himself. He walked through the crumbled remains of the buildings until he discovered a small stream. Crouching beside it, he watched the water flow. It was crystal clear and appeared safe to drink. Almas then looked toward the ruined houses and wondered whether they could live in them. He looked up before continuing his inspection of the area. He soon came across a broken piece of furniture and examined it for a moment. If they could repair it, they could use it temporarily. Suddenly, Almas noticed a wide field outside. Tall grass covered the area, which was surrounded by trees. He walked into the field and gently touched the growing grass. Although the field was covered in grass, it could still be used for farming, and its size was reasonable. Seeing everything that the abandoned village had to offer, Almas approached the griffin and expressed his gratitude. The place was far beyond what he had expected. The griffin had no problem with it, since it had not created the village in the first place. Almas then asked the griffin about the disaster that had caused the village to be abandoned. He specifically wanted to know about the famine and its cause. The griffin explained that the crops had failed and suggested that such an occurrence could be caused by a human. It was a curse. Almas was confused by the explanation and asked for clarification. The griffin wondered whether Almas did not know that curses existed. Almas then questioned whether the griffin had any evidence. The griffin considered the way it spoke about the matter to be evidence enough. Almas recalled that the griffin had previously explained that the world they lived in was under protection. If that was the case, then powerful forms of magic such as curses naturally existed as well. Almas still wondered why someone would use such a curse. The griffin considered the answer obvious. Humans were creatures that enjoyed killing, and it questioned whether there were any other creatures that loved killing one another to such an extent. Almas accepted the griffin's reasoning. Even if they managed to establish a farm, Almas realized that he and the children would not survive if another disaster like that occurred. The griffin assured him that there was no need to worry because it would not allow anyone to touch the jungle. No sorcerer could compare to its level of power. Furthermore, that type of curse could not be activated instantly. Almas understood and decided that he would call the children to the new location. However, the griffin looked toward the sky and noticed that the sun was already beginning to set. It decided that they should leave the children for the following day and told Almas to get on. Almas was reluctant at the thought of flying again, but before he could do anything, the griffin suddenly carried him into the sky. The next day, Almas informed everyone that they had a new home. The children were amazed by the news. Ron asked what their leader planned to do first. His use of the title showed that he still did not fully recognize Almas as their leader. It was only a slight acknowledgement. Soyen, standing behind Ron, urged him to be more honest. Ron responded by running away and chasing Soyen. Almas then noticed Tetra standing beside him. Tetra explained that before Almas arrived, they had been nothing more than a group of children. Every idea they came up with had been rejected, and they had no plan for the future. The children constantly missed their parents. Nearby, Ron and Rosewood began arguing with each other. Tetra explained that everything had changed after Almas arrived. Almas admitted that he used to be like Tetra. Ron then approached Almas and asked what he intended to teach them. Almas smiled and revealed that their first lesson would be crop rotation. The children were surprised by the concept of crop rotation, while Ron became excited at the thought of it because the term sounded like something delicious. Soyen could not help but remark that Ron seemed to have nothing but food on his mind. Almas explained that barley would be followed by clover, then clover by wheat, with the crops rotated over a 4-year period. Ron wondered why farming had to be made so complicated. Almas explained that farming was difficult when the soil lacked nutrients. Clover was effective at fertilizing the soil, allowing it to be cultivated throughout the year. In addition, raising cattle provided another benefit, as their waste could be collected and turned into manure to improve the fertility of the soil. The soil and cattle supported each other in a continuous cycle, which was the principle behind crop rotation. Although it sounded almost like magic, crop rotation was not without disadvantages. Dividing the field into 4 sections could reduce the yield by 2 to 3 times. Raising cattle could provide several benefits, but they first needed to have cattle, which meant finding them somehow. Rosewood admitted that he had absolutely no idea what Almas was talking about. Almas simplified the matter by explaining that, in brief, crop rotation was simply more productive, and that was all Rosewood needed to know. Almas then decided that their first priority was to repair the houses. The weather was pleasant as the children worked together, somehow managing to repair the destroyed village. When night fell, they lit a bonfire and gathered around it. The following day, Tetra asked Almas what he intended to do with the place. Almas explained that he was considering raising goats there. Goats could survive by eating bark and were not picky about their food, making them easy for even children to raise. However, they could not be used for labor. In truth, Almas wanted to raise cows or horses. They could provide meat and also be used for labor, but he did not know how to raise them. He then remembered that he had experience raising goat. The orphanage where he had lived had once maintained a farmstead, and he had helped raise cattle there in exchange for receiving some of the finished products. Tetra admitted that she did not know much about crop rotation and questioned whether they really needed to worry about it at the moment, considering that it would be somewhat troublesome. Almas continued by explaining that although goat milk tasted terrible, it contained a great deal of nutrition. The food provided by the griffin lacked calcium, and an unbalanced diet could have severe effects in the long run. Tetra remained confused by his explanation. Almas then asked whether she understood, and Tetra realized that Almas was simply worried about them. Almas said nothing in response and merely scratched his head. Near the house, someone brought up the matter of a cattle exchange. Soyen wondered how they could agree to such an arrangement when there was a famine. Tetra explained that the Rosai's kingdom was in urgent need of weapons, leaving them with no choice but to accept. Peeking through the window, Almas noticed that they were too far away from the other side. They would have to ask the griffin for help. Otherwise, transporting the goats would become difficult. Meanwhile, the griffin was busy threatening the goats, warning them that he would kill them if they tried to run. Ron, standing behind the griffin, was impressed that Griffin Sama could speak the language of the goat. Rosewood, however, found the method cruel, noting that although Griffin was threatening the goats to keep them under control, such treatment was harsh. Elsewhere in the village, several children were busy chasing after the goats while shouting. Almas carried a bow as he explained that while trading for goats, he had come across some bows and arrows that fit their sizes. Thinking they might prove useful for hunting, he had taken them as well. He proceeded to test one by shooting at a target, but the arrow missed. Ron immediately shouted that Almas was terrible at shooting and pointed out that it had already been his 10th miss. Furious, Almas handed the bow to Ron and challenged him to prove that he could do better. Ron grabbed the bow and pulled the string, but the arrow merely wobbled before falling off. Almas laughed at him, pointing out that even Ron could not use the bow properly and wondering how they were supposed to hunt with such equipment. Ron retorted that Almas should stop making sarcastic remarks and behave more maturely for an adult. Almas pointed out that he was a boy himself, but Ron insisted that he should act more maturely regardless. As the children watched them, one of them suggested that their leader let Graham try. Both Almas and Ron were confused by the suggestion. Graham took hold of the bow. Almas pointed out that even Ron had been unable to use it, suggesting that the problem might actually stem from the bow itself. He even joked that it might have been made in China. Suddenly, Graham pulled the string and released the arrow. It flew toward the target and almost struck the bullseye. The children were shocked by the result. Ron could hardly believe that Graham had actually managed to hit the target. Graham became flustered by the attention, but Soyen encouraged her to try again. Graham agreed and fired another arrow. Once again, it landed almost at the bullseye. Almas realized that Graham had managed to hit the target twice, while Ron recognized that the result was definitely not a matter of luck. The children immediately asked Graham to teach them. Graham began by explaining that they first needed to stretch their back. Later, Almas placed a hand on Graham's shoulder and reminded her that 3 years from then, the griffin would no longer be able to aid them. The responsibility of hunting would therefore fall on her shoulders, and she would have to do her best. Soyen concluded that, apart from Graham, none of them could hit the bullseye. Ron then worried about whether it was really acceptable for Graham to hunt alone. One of the girls added that they only had a single bow. Almas reassured them by showing them a pouch. He had another idea and decided that they should first examine what was inside. Soyen took the pouch and wondered what kind of bag it was. Almas explained that it was a sling used to throw stones. He demonstrated how to use it by placing one hand at the end of one cord and putting a stone inside. He then held the other cord with his opposite hand, spun the sling at the proper speed, timed the motion, and released the cord. The stone was launched with considerable force and almost struck the target. Almas explained that with proper training, they could use the sling to hit birds. It was also simple to make since stones could be found almost anywhere. Their first priority was therefore to equip every person with one. Later, they were in the mountains. The griffin explained that one particular leaf was safe for humans to eat, while another would cause a stomachache. However, dipping the dangerous leaf into water would wash away its poison. Almas was intrigued by the griffin's diet and confirmed that he could eat things other than meat. The griffin explained that he sometimes craved vegetables as well. Almas concluded that Griffin Sama was omnivorous, being half beast and half bird. Since his upper body took the form of a bird, eating vegetables was not particularly strange. Still, Almas found it somewhat odd to see a bird eating meat and wondered whether Griffin was ultimately a bird or a mammal. Almas then asked about a nearby mushroom. The griffin explained that he did not know whether it was safe for humans. He could eat it without any trouble, but a human could die immediately after consuming it. Later, Almas thanked the griffin. The griffin acknowledged him before preparing to return to his territory, as he was already feeling sleepy. He then flew into the sky while Almas waved goodbye. Almas decided that he should return home as well. Agriculture, dairy, butter, hunting animals, and all the other sources of food were vital, but harvesting was also important. For the children, harvesting would be relatively easy, especially since the griffin could teach them how to distinguish edible plants from inedible ones. Almas was walking alone through the jungle when he suddenly heard a shout. He stopped and immediately ran toward the source of the voice. He recognized it as Rosewood's voice. Almas placed a hand on his sword and assessed the situation. Now that he was equipped with a sword, he could attack and lure away a small animal if necessary. However, if the threat was something larger, he would have to find another way to rescue Rosewood. He could only hope that Rosewood was unharmed. Deep in the forest, Rosewood struggled against the hold of a man who was restraining him. The man ordered Rosewood not to move, but Rosewood resisted and insisted that the man could not do anything with him because his parents had abandoned him. Almas quietly approached from behind a bush and spotted the man. He realized that the person holding Rosewood was a human. Rosewood continued resisting and refused to accept being traded for food. Almas recognized him immediately. The bald man dismissed Rosewood's resistance, claiming that he already knew about his circumstances. He was particularly interested in the fact that Rosewood possessed numerous steel swords. Almas realized the man's true purpose. He had targeted Rosewood because he wanted to take their swords. The opponent was an adult with greater physical strength, but he appeared to be an ordinary person. Rosewood also seemed unharmed. Furthermore, the man was alone, leaving his back exposed. Almas began swinging his weapon while taking aim at the bald man. Before attacking directly, he decided that he should throw a stone first. The stone flew through the air and struck the bald man directly in the neck with a satisfying thunk. His grip on Rosewood loosened, allowing Almas to order Rosewood to run in that direction. The bald man immediately tried to stop the boy, but Rosewood looked back as Almas urged him to keep running. Rosewood wanted to stay and help, but Almas insisted that he leave quickly. Though reluctant, Rosewood knew Almas was right. He turned and started running, leaving Almas to face the enemy alone. The bald man touched his head and glared at Almas, realizing that he had deliberately blocked his path to give the boy time to escape. He then looked at his weapon and grabbed it, confident that Almas would regret standing in his way. Before confronting him, Almas decided to ask about his purpose. The bald man revealed that he intended to take their steel swords and trade them for food because he disliked farming. Hearing this, Almas felt relieved that the man's goal was simply to steal their swords. However, when the bald man questioned his relief, Almas suddenly drew his own sword and made it clear through his actions that the man was merely an idiot. Almas rushed forward and managed to stab the bald man. The man attempted to defend himself, but his weapon broke completely. The force of the attack caused him to collapse onto the ground and roll onto his side. Almas grabbed the man's back, positioned himself in front of him, and stabbed him again. The bald man tried to beg for his life, but Almas did not hesitate. Blood began gushing into the man's mouth. Filled with anger, Almas whispered through gritted teeth as he delivered the final blow. He knelt over the fallen man, knowing that if word of what had happened reached the village inhabitants, more people like him would come. The bald man had to die there because Almas saw no other way. Almas covered his mouth in shock and paused for a moment. His gaze fell upon the bald man's lifeless hand lying on the ground, and his heart pounded. Even if he had allowed the man to rob them that day, Almas feared that he would not have been satisfied. His hands trembled as he repeated the grim realization that if the village inhabitants heard about this, more people like the bald man would come. The man had to die there. There was no other way. Still shaken by what he had done, Almas quickly moved away before collapsing beside the fallen man. When the children rushed toward him and called out to him, he vomited. Some of them asked whether he was okay, but Almas could not answer. He wiped his mouth and stared silently at the ground, too exhausted and overwhelmed to speak. Rosewood reached out and grabbed Almas by the shoulder, desperately checking on him. Almas assured him that he was okay despite his weakened and exhausted body. Rosewood continued staring at him with wide, worried eyes, looking as though he was about to cry from fear over what might have happened. Trying to calm him, Almas gave Rosewood a soft smile and gently reassured him that he was fine, apologizing for causing him worry. Rosewood remained emotional, overwhelmed by how frightened he had been and by the thought that Almas might have died because of him. Almas touched his head and did not let Rosewood finish speaking. He apologized and admitted that he simply was not used to what had happened. Ron and Graham were also there by their side as they continued talking. Later, Almas and the Griffin were in a jungle, where Almas told him about what had happened earlier. The Griffin acknowledged that such things happened and that it was difficult, but reassured Almas that he should not worry too much about it. Humans were not the only creatures that killed one another, even ants did the same. Almas could simply think of the bald man as having done it for food, which made it nothing more than a matter of survival. Almas understood what the Griffin meant, but he still found it difficult to adopt that way of thinking. The Griffin explained that it was understandable for social creatures to find killing one another difficult to endure. However, protecting the children was Almas's responsibility, and safely bringing them back to their colony was part of that responsibility as well. The Griffin then checked whether Almas had finished his report and whether that was the only reason he had come. Almas realized that he had something else to show him. He held out a piece of broken wood, then suddenly cracked it with his bare hands and reduced it to pieces. The Griffin was puzzled by the demonstration, but then remembered something that made the situation seem strange. A 10-year-old child possessing that kind of strength was unusual. The Griffin knew of a human race capable of splitting a tree in half with their bare hands, although they were definitely not ordinary humans. Almas was horrified by what he heard. The Griffin reassured him that there was no need to worry because those people had left 3,000 years ago. Almas considered that fortunate for them. The Griffin then realized that Almas had not actually been trying to impress him with his strength. Almas had wanted to understand why he had suddenly gained such strength in the first place. The Griffin admitted that there was no way for him to know exactly what was happening to Almas's body. Even if he happened to guess correctly, the strength could be some kind of blessing. As a wanderer, Almas might have encountered some junior sang like himself and been given 1 or 2 blessings, so such a possibility would not be surprising. Almas became curious about what the Griffin meant by a junior sang. The Griffin simply referred to it as a junior sang and decided that it was better for Almas to know nothing about it. He then looked back and checked whether there was anything else Almas wanted to discuss. Almas admitted that he had obtained too much information at once and wanted some time alone later to process everything. Half a month later, the village had been completely rebuilt, and the village fields were now lined with rows of radishes. The children worked quietly beneath the sun as they tended to the crop. Almas was happy to see the vegetables growing. Farming was going well, especially since he had managed to exchange for radish seeds. Even better, the radishes were the same kind as those from his old world. However, it was unfortunate that they did not have enough laborers, which meant that their production scale remained small. For the moment, the radish farming was progressing well. Suddenly, Tetra sobbed. After noticing worms crawling among the plants, Ron called for Almas after finding one as well. Rosewood was disgusted when he spotted the pests in his own crops and pointed out that they were present there too. With no pesticides available, the village had been plagued by pests, which was another disadvantage of living deep in the jungle. Almas stood in front of a flower and drew everyone's attention to it. Ron and Soyen came closer and examined the flower. Soyen wondered what it was, while Ron identified it as a daisy used for getting rid of pests, commonly known as a pyrethrum daisy. Almas had discovered an entire bed of them. The flowers could be used as an ingredient for mosquito coils, and by distilling them and applying the resulting substance to the fields, they could get rid of the pest. Tetra eagerly agreed with the idea and immediately wanted everyone to start picking the flowers. Almas handed the flowers to Tetra, surprising her with the sudden gesture. Soyen noticed her confusion and explained that Almas had only wanted her to help hold the bouquet. Tetra suddenly smelled the flowers and scattered them around, leaving Almas confused by her actions. Later, Almas poured the flowers from a huge pot and began the distillation process. The children watched as he stirred the flowers inside the large pot. Almas wondered whether the resulting substance would be effective and considered that it might be. He then questioned why the pests died when exposed to it and wondered whether it was some kind of curse. Almas explained that the effect came from the poison contained in the flowers. The children were shocked and became frightened upon hearing that. Almas reassured them that it did not affect humans, although he was uncertain about what would happen if someone consumed a large amount of it. After finishing the process, Almas instructed everyone to begin spraying the resulting substance over the field. The children happily and determinedly poured the poison onto the plants, eager to protect their crops. Once the fields had been treated, Almas explained that they only needed to watch over the crops for the time being. Their necessities, such as food and shelter, were already in good condition, so they only needed to purchase whatever supplies were in short supply. Soyen wondered what he meant by supplies that were in short supply. Almas explained that these would include things such as clothes and food that could not be found in the wood. However, whenever they went out to obtain those supplies, someone needed to remain behind to protect the village. Graham would stay behind and take on that responsibility. Graham was shocked to learn that she had been chosen, but Almas considered her the most suitable person for the task because she could use a bow and arrows. Ron and Rosewood would serve as the carriers during the trip. Both boys readily agreed and appeared excited about the prospect. Almas then asked Tetra whether she wanted to join them. When Tetra wondered where they were going, Almas explained that they were going to Rosais. Tetra paused for a moment, then turned away and firmly decided not to accompany him. The children entered Rose's capital through its massive main gate, overwhelmed by the grandeur and bustling energy of the city after their long journey. The streets were incredibly crowded. As they walked through the city and admired their surroundings, Almas remarked that he had not seen so many people in a long time and found the city more beautiful than he had expected. Ron suddenly became excited when he spotted a large chef mixing food in a huge pot. He eagerly called Almas's attention to it, and Almas immediately noticed the delicious smell coming from the cooking food. Rose then grabbed Almas and pulled him toward a nearby store. Almas protested at being dragged along, but Rose excitedly pointed out that the store sold clothes. Inside, they saw a man sewing clothes. Rose was surprised to discover that men worked there as well. He grabbed Almas's arm again while Almas remained completely puzzled by his behavior. Rose then spotted something else and urged Almas to go with them and take a look. Almas began to sweat as the two children stared at him with excited expressions. He tried to calm them down, acknowledging that it was fine for them to get excited, but reminded them that dragging their senior around like that was a little too much. In the middle of the street, Almas told the two children that their first priority was to find a place where they could exchange money. Without money, they would not be able to buy anything. They searched around and eventually found a vendor in a corner. Almas asked whether there was a place where they could exchange animal teeth and herbs for money. The vendor pointed them toward a nearby building and indicated that the exchange was located there. They went to the building together and entered. Inside, an old man held out a strange, pointed hand and examined the animal teeth. He recognized them as animal teeth before offering Almas something else in exchange. The old man then offered an additional roll of karmic. Almas accepted what he was given and decided that it would be sufficient. He then presented his herbs for the next exchange. Just as the deal was being settled, a girl suddenly appeared out of nowhere, looking extremely excited. She immediately recognized the herbs as caramel grass, causing Almas to stare at her in surprise. The old man introduced the girl as Yuria-sama. She looked directly at Almas and immediately asked for his name. Almas felt slightly shy under her direct gaze but introduced himself. Yuria-sama then looked at the herbs Almas was holding and quickly expressed her interest in obtaining them, making it clear that she did not expect to receive them for free. Almas was amused by Yuria-sama's directness and decided that the exchange seemed like a good deal. Almas offered to sell the herbs for 1 gold coin. Yuria-sama accepted without hesitation and quickly handed him a gold coin. Almas then asked what she intended to use the herbs for. Yuria-sama explained that she planned to mix them with marijuana to create an amazing drug. Almas was shocked by her answer and wondered how her parents had raised her. Even though everything was being translated through the divine blessing of language, he could hardly believe that she had really said the word drug. Yuria then called him Almas-kun, but Almas asked her to simply call him Almas. Yuria smiled and agreed, asking him to call her Yuria without any honorifics as well, since they were the same age. Yuria noticed the two children standing behind Almas and asked who they were. Ron grabbed Rosewood by the shoulder and introduced himself. As he did so, he thought that Yuria seemed like some kind of rich kid. Rosewood then introduced himself as well, privately thinking about Yuria being a drug manufacturer. Yuria soon turned her attention back to Almas and asked where he was from. Almas explained that he came from a village about a day's journey away. Yuria wondered if it was near the Ramalia forest, then pointed out that caramel grass was very valuable. She asked Almas to show her where he had obtained such a large amount of it. Almas wanted to know what they would receive in return. Yuria laughed at his response before coming up with an idea. She proposed a deal in which Almas would deliver caramel grass to her every month, and in return, she would pay him 1 gold coin each time. Almas was delighted by the offer and readily agreed. Yuria then established that they would meet there again every month to exchange the caramel grass and payment. Both of them were pleased with the arrangement and shook hands to seal the deal. With the agreement settled, Yuria decided to return home because she knew her father would scold her if she stayed out too long. She realized that it was already time to leave, then grabbed Almas's hand and moved closer to him. She noticed that he possessed 1 blessing before turning away and waving goodbye. She reminded him of their deal before leaving. Almas was left shocked by her remark about a blessing. He wondered if Yuria had really said that he had a blessing. Back in their village, Tetra became serious as she began helping Almas with his language training. She instructed him to say good morning without relying on the divine blessing of language. Standing in front of Tetra, Almas attempted to speak in the unknown language. He was trying to learn the language of that world, but Tetra corrected his pronunciation again. Almas continued thinking about the divine blessing of language that Griffin-sama had lent him. Since it was something he had borrowed, he would eventually have to return it. If he suddenly lost the ability to communicate with everyone around him, things would become difficult. Because of that, he decided that he needed to learn the language properly. Almas then asked Tetra about what she knew regarding that world and whether she could explain it to him in detail. Tetra was stunned by the request but began explaining what she knew. They were living on the Adelia Peninsula, with approximately half of the peninsula belonging to the Rose Seal Kingdom. The peak pointing toward the ocean in the south was Carisia, which was why Tetra could also speak Carisian. Almas was impressed that she was bilingual. Tetra continued explaining that Rosais was not tightly controlled. The Rosais Kingdom and Demorgals Kingdom shared the same name, but this did not mean anything significant beyond a form of political cooperation between the two kingdoms. On a quiet day, Almas asked Tetra whether she could write. Tetra found the question easy to answer and confirmed that she could. Almas then asked her to teach him how to write the words once he had memorized them. Tetra explained that Adelia did not have any kind of writing system. Almas was surprised by this and questioned her about it. He then realized that she could write in Carisian and confirmed that this was the case. After he finished learning Adelian, he asked Tetra to teach him Carisian as well. Tetra considered the request for a moment before agreeing. As Tetra continued helping him, Almas realized how much assistance she was giving him. He began thinking that perhaps he should give her something in return. He then asked Tetra how far she could count. Tetra answered that she could count to about 10,000. Almas followed up by asking how well she could perform calculations. Tetra answered that she could perform two-digit addition and subtraction. In Almas's mind, he wondered if Tetra was really that capable compared to everyone else. He decided that the following day he would show Tetra something. The next day, Almas stood in front of the children and announced that they would learn addition. Lulu was immediately shocked by the idea and raised a question. She wondered whether learning addition would actually be beneficial to them. Ron and Rose, standing at the back, resisted the lesson and agreed that it would only be time-consuming. Almas acknowledged their concern but explained that they could not learn farming alone. They would eventually have to exchange their materials for money, and without knowing how to calculate, they would easily be deceived by traders. He asked Rose and Ron whether he was right, and both children agreed. They admitted that they had already been fooled when buying things because they had failed to take their change. Almas then explained to everyone that knowing how to calculate would give them more opportunities in the future. They could even open their own store instead of limiting themselves to farming. He then asked Tetra to count from 1 to 10. Tetra thought for a moment before beginning to count. Almas immediately noticed that she had left out 0, leaving Tetra completely shocked when he pointed it out. Soyen was also surprised by the concept of 0. Almas considered himself lucky that this world was based on 10 numbers, even though its people did not know about 0. He drew a circle resembling the number 0 and explained that it represented nothing. In the end, Almas taught them Arabic numerals. He considered Arabic numerals convenient and one of the 10 greatest human inventions. However, Tetra, who had previously been capable of writing numbers up to 10,000, was the only one who became annoyed by the lessons. She found the system too complicated. Almas smiled and reassured her that once she became accustomed to it, she would find it more interesting. The following day, Tetra sat beside Almas while holding a flat tool. She looked up proudly after finishing her work and indicated that she had answered everything. Almas was surprised by how quickly she had completed it. By then, a month had passed since Almas first began teaching the children addition. After looking at their rankings, he decided that those with higher rankings would be responsible for teaching the children with lower rankings. In the end, Tetra ranked first and therefore had to teach everyone. Outside, Tetra and Almas discussed the arrangement of teaching the other children. Tetra felt that teaching them without receiving any benefit in return would be unfair. She wanted to be taught algebra first. She had already taught Almas both Adelian and Corisian, so she felt that receiving nothing in return would not be fair. As a result, Almas gave Tetra a special perk. Inside the house, Tetra sat in front of Almas and listened as he checked her work. He confirmed that all of her answers were correct and noted that she was already proficient in 3-digit addition and subtraction. Almas decided to try something else. Tetra anticipated that he might move on to 4-digit calculations, but Almas explained that there was little difference between 3-digit and 4-digit calculations. He then moved on to multiplication. Tetra thought about it before asking Almas whether everyone in his home country could perform calculations. Almas confirmed that they could, even children younger than Tetra. However, he privately believed that Tetra was better than all of them. Because Tetra had been forced to learn everything from the beginning using Arabic numerals, she had developed a stronger understanding of them than the others. Tetra noticed that Almas seemed to be complimenting her and smiled as she asked whether he was praising her. Almas gently rubbed her head. Tetra then wondered why everyone was capable of learning these things. Almas explained that in his country, studying was considered a responsibility, making education a benefit available to every citizen. Knowledge was gold, and although some people might want to keep it for themselves, Almas believed that restricting knowledge to the upper class would prevent the country from developing and competing with other nations. He asked Tetra whether she wanted to raise more intelligent children like herself. He then added that it was an adult's responsibility to do what was best for the children. Tetra wondered whether such a responsibility was complicated, and Almas confirmed that it was. Tetra then asked when Almas would become fluent in those languages. Almas explained that she might already understand the difficulty involved, but mastering a language was not easy. Tetra then worried about what would happen if Almas lost the divine blessing of language one day. Almas explained that if that happened, he would no longer be able to teach her mathematics. Tetra immediately concluded that, because of that, he absolutely could not lose the divine blessing of language. After some time, Almas met Yuria again. He had brought the caramel grass as promised, holding it in his hand as Yuria handed him the coin. She then asked about Ron and Rosewood, and Almas explained that they had stayed at home. Almas wanted to discuss something with Yuria, and she immediately understood that it concerned the blessing he had been wondering about for the past month. Almas admitted that he wanted to learn more about it if possible. Yuria explained that she did not know much herself, but according to the books and references she had read, blessings were given by fairies, specifically good fairies. Almas found the idea of fairies fantastical. Yuria explained that the reason she knew he was blessed was because her own blessing allowed her to see the blessings of others. It was called the see-through blessing. From what she could see, Almas possessed the blessing of the king. The blessing of the king grew stronger as more people recognized Almas as their leader, improving his abilities accordingly. Almas realized that this meant the children had accepted him as their leader and wondered whether his current abilities were the result of that blessing. Yuria confirmed that this was indeed the case. Yuria then asked Almas about his life in Ramalia Forest, the Griffin's territory, and whether he was not afraid of his curse. Almas wondered how she knew that they were living in Ramalia. Yuria explained that she could see things from a great distance through her blessing of Heaven's Eye. She had seen them entering the forest and assumed that they intended to live there. Yuria wanted to know how Almas had avoided the Griffin's curse and asked him to explain. Almas revealed that there was actually no curse. He decided that telling Yuria would not cause any harm, although he had no intention of telling her about his reincarnation. Later, Yuria concluded that they were all abandoned children. She understood the situation and promised not to tell anyone. Almas thanked her for keeping their secret. Yuria then asked Almas to accompany her because she needed to buy something. Almas agreed, considering her a special customer anyway. Later, in the city, Almas was shocked by the sheer amount of shopping Yuria intended to do. He ended up carrying all of the items she purchased while Yuria continued shopping. She encouraged him to endure it and act like a man. Almas acknowledged that he certainly was a man but felt that she should not treat him as her carrier. One of the vendors watched Almas carrying everything with apparent ease and was astonished by how effortlessly he seemed to handle all of the items. Almas noticed that Yuria had purchased all kinds of strange herbs and rocks and became curious about their purpose. Yuria explained that they were materials for practicing hoodoo, revealing that she herself was a hoodoo. Almas associated hoodoo with frightening spells and curses. Yuria clarified that a hoodoo performed many different kinds of work, with cursing being only one of them. Hoodoo could also involve creating magical barriers, breaking curses, and making medicines. It was even a profession practiced by humans. Almas thought that, in Japan, Yuria would essentially be a doctor. She might even have held a strong reputation and high social status. This reminded Almas of what the Griffin had told him about curses being caused by humans themselves. Curious about the matter, Almas asked Yuria what she thought about the famine. Yuria believed that it was mostly caused by the curse, as people claimed that a group of advanced witches had created it. Almas wondered what kind of person could place such a massive curse on such a large scale. Yuria believed it could not have been the work of a single person and that it must have been a nation. A curse of that scale would inevitably result in thousands of deaths. Even so, she assured Almas that he did not need to worry, as she would not be lenient with whoever was responsible the next time. Almas was surprised by her determination. He then invited Yuria to visit Ramalia with him sometime. Yuria was excited by the possibility, but she would first need to speak with her father, who might not allow her to leave the city. Almas also asked Yuria to teach him hoodoo another time. Yuria was surprised and considered the request. Almas offered to pay her for the lessons, but Yuria refused any money, considering them friends. Almas was surprised by her declaration of friendship. Yuria, however, seemed to question whether they were not already friends. Almas confirmed that they were indeed friends, reasoning that otherwise he would not be carrying all of Yuria's purchases for her. He then asked why she could not teach him hoodoo. Yuria explained that she could teach him, but Almas was simply not cut out for it. 90% of hoodoos were female, and there was a significant difference between male and female hoodoos. Almas became curious about the remaining 10%, but Yuria explained that she could recognize who possessed talent for hoodoo and who did not. Unfortunately, Almas had no such talent. Almas decided to forget about it. He needed to return home anyway, but before leaving, he asked Yuria where she lived. Yuria hesitated before giving the name Baltan. Almas was still trying to understand when Yuria suddenly called out to someone, asking whether they were there and telling them to come out. A man appeared and asked what Yuria needed him for. Almas was shocked by his sudden appearance and wondered how long the man had been there. He also noticed that the man reeked of alcohol. Yuria introduced the man as Baltan, her bodyguard. Baltan laughed at the way she referred to him and remarked that she clearly did not like him. He then greeted Almas and thanked him for helping Yuria. Yuria instructed Almas to hand all the things over to Baltan. Almas wondered why she had not simply brought Baltan with her in the first place, and Yuria explained that it was because Baltan smelled of alcohol. Almas handed everything to Baltan. As soon as Baltan received the items, his face grimaced from the weight. He was astonished that the load was so heavy and wondered how a child could carry that much. Almas merely laughed before telling Yuria that he was leaving. Yuria waved goodbye to Almas and told him they would see each other later. Later, after returning to his village, Almas explained to the children that thanks to the caramel grass, they now earned 1 gold coin every month. Their agriculture had also become quite stable, meaning they no longer needed to worry about food. Unfortunately, essential goods, especially clothes and salt, remained too expensive. Because of that, they needed to become self-sufficient in areas beyond food as well. Rosewood understood the situation but wondered what they could do about it. Almas decided that they would make pottery, which meant they needed a kiln. Tetra wondered what they should do first. Almas admitted that he did not know the exact method, so they would simply build a traditional kiln. He instructed everyone to bring their hoes and axes. Soyen asked where they should build it, and Almas decided that a nearby slope would be suitable. Almas knew that a slope could be used to construct a kiln as illustrated below. Since hot air was lighter, it would rise above the clay and create the necessary conditions for the kiln. The only problem was the amount of labor required. Cutting down a tree alone could take an entire day. Nevertheless, Almas decided that they would simply get started and do it. A while ago, when Almas was bartering goods with Yuria at the shop, he had asked her what was considered valuable in the area. Yuria wondered whether he intended to present something to her. In Almas' mind, he still could not read perfectly, but he clarified that it was nothing like that. He was simply looking for anything they could trade for salt or clothes. Yuria found his sudden change of mind amusing and pointed toward a pot, suggesting pottery as an option. Almas wondered about it since people could easily find ordinary pots on the street. Yuria explained that she meant pottery from Carizia, which was completely different from the pottery made locally. It was highly durable and had a beautiful color, making it especially popular among the royalties. Almas considered the idea of durable pottery with a beautiful color. The pots he had seen in the past were reddish and extremely fragile. According to Tetra, pottery from Rosice was glazed in the open air. Compared to his old world, Almas considered it similar to the Jaman and Ya eras, in other words, primitive pottery. Since the pottery was glazed outside, too much oxygen was supplied, preventing the temperature from rising high enough. Almas wondered how they could make a more durable pot. The answer was an anagama. The temperature could rise easily within an enclosed space. By closing the chimneys and kiln door, the amount of oxygen could be limited. This would produce a black-colored pot that could never be made in the open air. In other words, sewware could be produced with relative ease. Almas did not know exactly what kind of pot Yuria had been referring to from Carizia. However, with an anagama, he was certain that his pottery would be better than any pot in Rosice. Their goal was now to produce sewware. If they succeeded, their village would finally have its own first specialty product. Almas paused what he was doing and reflected on how easy it was to cut trees thanks to this blessing. Tetra wondered whether he was really human, noting that Almas possessed much more strength than a normal adult. In Almas' mind, he could currently perform as much physical work as several people combined. Griffin considered the blessing nothing particularly special, but admitted that it was at least very useful for cutting trees. Later, Almas announced to everyone that they would dig some holes along the slope next. They began digging, and afterward, Almas wiped his forehead, satisfied that they were finished digging holes for the time being. Ron then asked what they should dig next. Almas explained that they needed clay, an extremely important material for making pottery. It would also be used to make the kiln more airtight. Ron wondered about the meaning of airtight, so Almas explained that it meant keeping the cold air from outside from entering and allowing the heat inside the kiln to rise. If the kiln was not properly sealed, they would have no chance of making sewware. Looking at the kiln in front of him, Almas acknowledged that he had built it without any actual experience, relying only on the memories from his previous life. Even so, he guessed that it was better than what he had imagined. He then informed the children that they would begin making handicraft. Later, Tetra was occupied with molding clay while Ron and Rosewood were fighting with it and throwing pieces of clay at each other. Soyen yelled at them to stop throwing clay around, and Graham also told them to stop. Another piece of clay splattered across Rosewood's face, causing him to dash after Ron. Soyen was left shouting after them, telling them not to run. Tetra could only mutter that they were idiots. Almas wondered whether they could not even make their own tableware. They were going to need a large amount of tableware and pots, so they would have to make plenty themselves. Tetra questioned whether they really needed to make so much. Almas confirmed that they did because such things were fragile. If they broke them, it would be their own responsibility. He then instructed everyone to let the first batch of pots dry. Rosewood discovered that his plate had cracked, while Ron pointed out that it was because Rosewood had failed to knead the clay properly. Almas placed another pot inside the kiln and prepared to heat it. However, since the kiln had been built by amateurs, he could not expect too much from it. Later, Almas held up a pot in front of everyone, leaving them amazed. Its beautiful grayish color caught his attention, and he was certain that it was a kurasabi. Ron wondered about it, so Almas explained that it was essentially a more valuable type of pottery compared to Rose's reddish pottery. Considering that they were amateurs, producing it was quite an achievement. Ron then revealed that his pot had broken, and Rosewood's had broken as well. Soyen pointed out that it was because the two of them had kept playing around. Almas examined one of the pots and reassured them that there would be other opportunities. They could simply make better ones next time, especially since they had plenty of time. Ron and Rosewood looked at each other cheerfully as Almas moved on to their next task, charcoal. He showed them how to arrange the pieces so there would be no unnecessary spaces between them. If there were gaps they could not cover, they were instructed to fill them with dried leaf. Once everything was prepared, Almas fired up the kiln. The children watched the kiln as it burned. Later, Almas instructed them to wait for a while before closing the chimney and the kiln door. After leaving it that way for a day, they would have their charcoal. Tetra noticed that the process was not much different from making pottery. Almas agreed, explaining that both processes required limiting their interaction with oxygen. Tetra then asked about oxygen, and Almas explained that it was something needed to make a fire. It was part of the air, and without oxygen they could not make a fire. Tetra wondered why oxygen itself did not burn. Almas became nervous but explained that burning was a chemical reaction in which carbon bonded with oxygen and became oxidized. Oxygen itself did not burn, instead it helped other things burn. Tetra seemed to understand the explanation. They left the kiln burning for a while. Later, they opened it and examined the result. Holding a piece of charcoal, Almas realized that it was not very good. He suspected that the problem was that, unlike in his previous life, they had no drums or barrels available, allowing air to continue leaking in from outside. Even so, the charcoal would at least be enough to help them get through the winter. Winter eventually passed, and a new year began. Griffin brought several children toward Almas and explained that they were new kids who had been prowling around inside his forest. After leaving the children in Almas' care, the Griffin flew away. Almas informed Tetra that their village's population had increased by 10 after the winter. He then asked how many types of taxes were collected there. Tetra explained that it depended on the country and the powerful families in the area, but there were basically 4 types: land tax, population tax, labor service, and military conscription. Almas asked the children whether their parents had abandoned them in the forest because they did not want to pay taxes. The children looked at one another without answering. Tetra explained that, as far as she knew, Rosais had lower taxes than the other kingdoms, and its king was not the type to impose heavy taxes on his people. Soyen pressed the children for the truth and asked where they had actually come from. According to the children, they were citizens of Rosais. Soyen then explained that there was a main noble family known as Ash. Almas wondered about the meaning of a main family, finding the situation increasingly troublesome. Soyen clarified that it referred to the main family acting as a landlord over an area. The Ash family had been betrayed by its own retainers. Those retainers had even planned to separate from the Rosais kingdom, something the king of Rosais naturally refused to approve. This led to domestic conflicts among the branch families of Ash. Almas pieced together the situation. Many people had been lost in those conflicts, forcing them to raise heavy taxes to cover the expenses of the war. As a result, their storehouses had been emptied during the winter. Tetra suddenly asked whether that was the truth before running outside. Almas was surprised by her sudden reaction and immediately followed her, wondering where she was going. He managed to catch her, and when he turned her around to face him, he saw that she was crying. Tetra realized that she had been right and began recalling what had happened to her mother and father, but she could not finish before breaking down into sobs. Almas hugged her and comforted her, assuring her that everything was okay. Later, back at their place, Almas covered the sleeping Tetra with a blanket. He realized that she seemed to have experienced many difficult things in her past. Soyen peeked into the room and wondered what had happened to Tetra. She wanted to know about it as well, while Graham remarked that it was extremely rare to see Tetra cry like that. Almas explained that everyone had times when they simply wanted to cry and told them that they needed to leave. In Almas' mind, it was perfectly normal for children to cry when they had nightmares, got into trouble with their parents, or sometimes even for no particular reason. Whenever that happened, he would usually comfort them. However, this was the first time he had ever seen Tetra cry. As Almas stepped outside, Ron and Rosewood asked whether Tetra was all right. Almas told them not to worry because she was okay for now. In truth, he was relieved. It was strange that Tetra had held back her tears until now, especially since continuing to suppress them while feeling that sad was bad for her body. Almas instructed Ron and Rosewood not to do anything unusual when Tetra woke up and to act normally around her. He was certain that she would be embarrassed about what had happened. The two agreed. Almas then decided that they would return to working in the fields so they would not wake Tetra. As he paused, he considered Tetra, the newcomers, and everyone's future. There were still many things he needed to think over before deciding what they should do next. In the Rosais kingdom, Almas asked Yuria whether she would allow him to meet her father. Yuria paused before explaining that her father always wanted to meet her friends, so she believed it would be fine, though she wondered whether Almas was truly comfortable with the idea. Almas had been considering it for some time. The Ramalia forest was surrounded by 4 countries, and the kingdom of Rosais was the most chaotic among them, with various conflicts taking place. For their village to remain safe, they needed the support of someone with enough influence. If Almas' prediction was correct, Uria's father possessed sufficient power to serve that role. The taxes would certainly be troublesome, but they could not depend on Griffin's protection forever. Uriah eventually accepted his reasoning. Later, as they walked through the town, Almas noticed the numerous large houses in that part of the city. To his surprise, he soon realized that the road they were taking led directly to the royal palace. When he entered through the gate, he could hardly believe what was happening. A man with an unmistakably royal appearance approached Almas. Uriah's father welcomed him and expressed his pleasure at finally meeting him, personally thanking Almas for being his daughter's friend all this time. Almas then learned the truth from Uriah. She had forgotten to mention that her father was the king of Rosais. Almas nervously wondered why she had not told him sooner, realizing that he had made no preparations whatsoever for standing before a king. He stared at the king for a moment before composing himself. Almas knelt and respectfully introduced himself, expressing his pleasure at finally meeting Uriah's father and his honor at being considered her friend. The king told him that there was no need to be so formal and encouraged Almas to treat him simply as Uriah's father. This was the first time Uriah had ever introduced one of her friends to the king. In the past, all of her attention had been devoted to studying magic, leaving her with no friends. Uriah became embarrassed by her father's remark and protested, prompting him to laugh and encourage her to calm down. Almas reflected on the fact that Uriah had truly never had any friends. He realized that she had not been pretending when she had once made him carry all those things for her. The king then revealed that he understood what Almas was really seeking. Almas was not merely looking for Uriah's father but, more simply, someone with enough influence whom he could rely on. Almas remained silent. The king reassured him that there was no need to worry and urged him to explain his intentions honestly. Since Almas was the first friend Uriah had ever acknowledged, the king was willing to help him in any way he could. Almas accepted and proceeded to tell the king the entire story, carefully leaving out the matter of his reincarnation. He had no desire to invite any more unnecessary trouble. After hearing everything, the king processed the information that his own people had been abandoning their children in the Ramalia forest. He came to the conclusion that he bore responsibility for the situation. Almas clarified that he was not asking the king to provide them with refuge or anything of the sort. The king assured Almas that it was fine, as asking for refuge had not been what he had been thinking either. He suddenly bowed his head to Almas, addressing him as his beloved daughter's friend, and reaffirmed his intention to protect the people of his kingdom. Protecting his people was his responsibility, and he thanked Almas for taking care of the kingdom's people. Almas was stunned that the king of an entire country was bowing his head to him. The king then told Almas that if he intended to become a citizen of Rosais, he would be more than welcome. He would use everything within his power to protect Almas, his people, and their property. Once again, it was his duty as king. Almas explained that they were currently relying on Griffin for their food supply and asked whether there would be any problems concerning taxes. The king explained that Rosais had a law exempting newly explored land from taxes for 5 years. Besides, given their current circumstances, Almas would not be able to pay any considerable amount of tax anyway. Almas considered the matter and realized that, 5 years from now, the children would likely be capable of managing on their own. He bowed to the king and accepted the arrangement. They would gradually become citizens of Rosais and pay every tax required of them when the time came. The king agreed and welcomed them all to become part of the country. Almas felt greatly relieved. With this arrangement, the children would have a strong foundation for their future development, allowing him to finally relax a little. The king then asked whether any of the children staying with Almas were from the Ash family. Almas confirmed that there were, explaining that the taxes might have been too heavy for some of them and that he suspected some had been unable to survive the winter. The king fell silent for a moment before making his own request. He had listened to Almas' request and wanted to know whether Almas would listen to his in return. There were only 3 requests. Almas considered this and realized that he had only asked the king for one thing, so he accepted that it could not be helped. The king's first request was for Almas to introduce their village to him so that he could personally verify whether Almas' claims were true. Almas found the request reasonable, understanding that the king needed to determine whether he was dealing with an enemy or not. He accepted. The second request was for Almas to continue being friends with Uriah. Almas readily agreed to this as well. The king's final request was for Almas to teach Uriah mathematics. Uriah was visibly shocked by the request. Almas agreed to teach her but wondered whether there were not more suitable candidates for such a position. The king explained that he had heard Almas' mathematical ability was even greater than that of the merchants within the country. It was embarrassing to admit, but Uriah was extremely poor at mathematics. She especially struggled with multiplication and division and could not remember a single thing her teachers had taught her. Uriah protested that she could still perform those calculations. Almas then held out his hands and tested her by asking how many grains of rice each child would receive if 100 grains were divided among 25 children. Uriah calculated using her fingers before answering that each child would receive 10. Almas concluded that her ability was rather rough. The king pointed out that Yuria could not remember anything from her teachers and reasoned that, since Almas was already her friend, he should be willing to teach her. Almas then asked whether there would be any payment for teaching her. The king offered him 1 gold coin during the first week of every month. Almas bowed and accepted, promising to help Yuria with everything he had. Yuria strongly objected, insisting that she wanted to learn magic rather than mathematics. After the meeting, the king remained alone in the throne room and reflected on Almas, deciding that he liked the boy. Someone then entered and addressed him as brother, asking what he had been planning back there. The king was surprised to see Raymond and wondered what he meant by planning. Raymond pointed out that the king had allowed a boy like Almas to become Yuria's personal tutor. The king explained that Almas was Yuria's friend anyway, and allowing his adorable daughter to learn alongside a friend would likely be the most effective approach. Raymond made it clear that the king did not need to hide his intentions from him. The king paused under Raymond's scrutiny before clarifying that it was not that sort of arrangement. He regarded it simply as an investment. Raymond asked for an explanation, so the king revealed that Almas was the leader of a group protected by the Griffin. In other words, the Griffin could be considered their foster father. Raymond realized that the king was referring to that particular Griffin. The king explained that stories of people being raised by beasts such as tigers or dragons were not particularly unheard of in their kingdom. People loved mysterious stories like that, and their own people were no different. The Griffin might prove useful to them in the future, so maintaining a close relationship with the boy could do them no harm. Raymond excitedly understood the king's reasoning. The king admitted that, to be honest, he had not yet thought of any particularly useful plans regarding Almas. For now, he first needed to examine Almas' abilities and personality more closely. Since Almas was Yuria's tutor, they would have the opportunity to meet him once every week. Raymond praised his brother's foresight, but the king told him to stop. Although he was not an incompetent ruler, he could not claim to be particularly excellent either. His inability to protect Lagu Ash was the strongest proof of that. Ash was one of the largest families in the country. Losing such a powerful ally as Lagu Ash would naturally deal them a severe blow, but the consequences went beyond that. By admitting that he had been unable to protect them, the king acknowledged that the Ash family's claim that he favored and supported the other branches of the family had some basis. Because of this incident, not only the Ash family but other grand families were beginning to lose faith in the royal family as well. Raymond fell silent before identifying the alliance of the neighboring kingdoms as their most pressing problem. He cursed King Herm for daring to move his troops into their territory. The king added that Hyena was also involved. Neither he nor Raymond had a son to inherit their positions, making their situation increasingly difficult. The king urged Raymond not to make such a troubled expression. At least his own queen had left him Yuria during the final moments of her life. Even without a son, he was content to have Yuria by his side. Her mother had passed away from an illness soon afterward, and perhaps it was simply fate. He also found it somewhat amusing that Raymond had no sons either. Raymond gave an awkward laugh and urged his brother not to dwell on such painful memories. There was still time, and they could choose a proper candidate from their branch families and have him join with Yuria. Meanwhile, Yuria sneezed as she walked with Almas, prompting him to check whether she was all right. Back in the throne room, the king reflected on how much he wanted Yuria to be happy. He could not understand why all these problems kept coming at them from every corner of the kingdom. He had a feeling that the country might come to an end during his reign. Even so, no matter what happened, he wanted to find a solution while he was still alive. Looking down from the window, the king watched Yuria and Almas walking together. There was something about the young man that made him believe the child of the Griffin could bring something worth hoping for. If possible, he wanted to see those hopes become reality. However, the king of Rosais still did not know that his first move had already brought a miracle to the country, or rather, to the entire Adelnia Peninsula, which was considered the center of the world. Almas had been thinking that Tetra had been acting strangely lately. When he looked at her, Tetra suddenly jumped at the sight of him and quickly turned around. She had always been a timid girl, but recently, it seemed that something was making her uneasy. Even the others were beginning to notice it. If something had truly happened, Almas could not simply let it continue. He approached Tetra and reassured her that she could always refuse to talk if she did not feel ready, but at the very least, she should let him and the others know if something was wrong. He then asked what had been troubling her lately. Tetra stared at him for a moment before realizing that he had noticed. Almas explained that her recent behavior had made it quite obvious and asked her to tell him what was wrong. Tetra first sought a promise that he would not tell anyone else. Almas gave her his word, and she finally revealed that her full name was Tetra Ash. Almas's eyes widened as everything began to make sense. Tetra had started acting strangely ever since she heard that the Ash family had been attacked by their followers. He had also suspected that she might have some kind of connection to the Ash family, but he had never imagined that she was actually part of it. Tetra was surprised that Almas was not more shocked. He admitted that he was a little surprised, since he had never expected someone like the princess of a large family such as the Ash family to be here. However, her identity and past did not matter that much to him. She was still the same Tetra they had always known. Tetra was taken aback by his words before smiling and thanking him. She felt a little happier now. Almas smiled back, glad that she felt better, and then asked what the real problem was. Tetra admitted that she was not quite sure herself. She only knew that her parents were dead. She could feel it. Although a strong part of her wanted to deny that fact, she still hoped that they were merely being held captive. Even so, she could not forgive Robert Firm. Almas realized that Robert Firm, one of the followers, was the person behind her parents' deaths. Tetra confirmed it. Robert had been one of her father's closest subordinates and had always been her father's favorite. That was why Robert had risen from being a simple commoner to one of the high-class nobles before eventually replacing her father. Tetra could not forgive that man, and she knew she never would. Almas paused for a moment before wondering whether Tetra wanted to take revenge on Robert. Tetra herself did not know. Deep inside, she wanted to cut that man into a million pieces. Yet, at the same time, she did not want to leave this place. She knew quite a few people from the family branches, but she was not particularly close to any of them. Her real friends and her real family were all here. Almas understood her conflict. Tetra wanted revenge against the person who had murdered her entire family, but she also did not want to lose the place she had come to cherish or the friends she had made there. That was why she had been suffering all this time. Almas reassured Tetra that she did not have to worry because no one there would abandon her. Tetra stared at him before looking away, remembering that her parents had always said the same thing. Almas coughed before suggesting that she instead do her best to protect him and everyone else there. Tetra was surprised by the suggestion, but Almas pointed out that she was really smart, even smarter than him. Tetra smiled and accepted Almas's encouragement, resolving to protect him and everyone else. Almas stood up and reminded her that, if she ever decided to seek vengeance, he wanted her to inform him first. He would support her with everything he had, so she should not try to handle everything on her own. After all, she was an important person to him. Tetra's eyes widened at his words, and she immediately began to panic. Hearing him say that so suddenly caught her completely off guard. Almas, meanwhile, was confused by her reaction. In an effort to make himself convincing, he had deliberately avoided using the divine blessing of language and instead tried to express himself using his Adelnia vocabulary. Unfortunately, his choice of words only seemed to make Tetra more embarrassed. Almas interpreted her reaction as Tetra simply becoming embarrassed too easily. Since they were basically like brother and sister by now, he could not understand why she was being so shy. Tetra, however, was desperately convincing herself that she would be a coward if she let such an opportunity pass. Gathering her courage, she prepared to reveal that she also liked him, but before she could finish, Soyen suddenly approached them and began talking about how much fun gardening was. When Soyen noticed Tetra, she pointed out the plentiful crops she had gathered and showed them to her. Then, after taking another look at Almas and Tetra, Soyen realized that they must have been discussing something important. She quickly came to her own conclusion and, in a loud voice, apologized for interrupting their moment before running away. Soyen then announced to the others that Tetra and Almas were secretly dating. Tetra immediately called after Soyen and tried to correct the misunderstanding. Almas could only wonder why Tetra was reacting so strongly. Regardless, it seemed that Soyen's interruption had brought Tetra back to her usual self. Another year and several months passed, and Almas turned 14 years old. Ron noticed that their leader had become quite skilled at speaking Adelina. Almas figured that he should return the divine blessing of language to Griffin soon. Thanks to Tetra, his Carishian reading and writing abilities had improved greatly. However, there was still one problem. The coins fell from his pouch. As soon as they hit the ground, Almas explained that he had come to pay the population tax, which amounted to 3 people in total. The tax collector recognized him as someone from the forest of Ramaria, and Almas confirmed that the 3 people were himself, Ron, and Soyen. Fortunately, the tax was still a manageable amount for the time being. However, the amount would increase as they grew older, and Griffin's support would also end in a year. As expected, they needed to raise the village's self-sufficiency. Almas could not help thinking that taxes were rather amusing and wondering whether Griffin could simply pay him with alcohol instead. After returning to their house in the village, Almas began thinking aloud about what they should do next. Tetra pointed out that deciding what to do from then on was important, but for the time being, they should start by threshing the harvested wheat. She also urged Rosewood not to simply stand around doing nothing. Rosewood explained that he was different from Lulu and was not good at that sort of work. Processing the harvest had been difficult during the previous season. Soyen agreed, recalling how exhausting the work had been. Almas was dismayed at the thought of having to work as hard as they had the previous season. He was not prepared to go through that again. He then asked Graham how they had threshed the wheat before. Graham explained that, at first, everyone had picked out the individual grains by hand. Eventually, they had resorted to placing a piece of wood on top of the stalks and scraping the grains out. Both methods were far too inefficient. Almas agreed and showed them something he had prepared. It was called a senbakoki. He demonstrated how they needed to gather roughly this much wheat and place it into the machine in a specific manner. Once they pulled it up, the wheat would be separated. Soyen was amazed at how much easier the process was. Almas explained that the upper part would normally be made from bamboo or metal, but since theirs was made from wood, it was somewhat clunky. Tetra watched the device closely and recognized that, despite its simple structure, it greatly increased their efficiency. She praised Almas for the idea. Almas remembered seeing something similar in his previous life. Ron wondered whether it would be amazing if such an invention spread to others. Almas assured him that, if Ron was looking for useful ideas, he had plenty more where that came from. Soyen then pointed out that peeling was also troublesome. Rosewood wondered whether Almas had prepared a useful tool for peeling as well. Almas explained that he had bought a stone mortar, but the work itself would not change. For that task there was no choice but to work hard. Ron enthusiastically volunteered to take responsibility for the stone mortar. Almas added that, fortunately, they had plenty of people to help, so for the time being, they would have to manage with what they had. The last task was sorting the husks from the seeds. One of the children asked Tetra what she was going to do with what she was holding. Tetra demonstrated how to shake the rice husks and seeds together in a specific manner. By doing so, the lighter rice husks would rise while the seeds remained at the bottom. She taught the children that although the process was time-consuming, repeatedly doing this would eventually separate them. Almas called Tetra over and told her that he wanted to test another tool. He uncovered it, prompting Tetra to ask what it was. Almas explained that it was a winnower and showed her how to take the rice husks and feed them through the opening. When he demonstrated how it worked, Tetra was surprised. Soyen was amazed when a single turn of the handle separated so many of the husks. Tetra quickly noticed that wind was being sent through the machine and realized that the propeller in the middle was what created it. Almas confirmed that she had understood correctly and encouraged her to learn through trial and error so they could get the hang of using it. However, as soon as Almas turned the handle, it suddenly broke. Tetra pointed out that it seemed he would need to make another one. Almas agreed, thinking that the harvesting process was mostly settled. If there was another problem they needed to solve, it would have to be dealt with next. Later, Almas met with Yuria. Yuria asked how she looked, and Almas assured her that she looked perfect and that she could look amazing whenever she tried. Yuria reminded him that there was no need for him to speak so formally when they were alone because it made her feel awkward. Almas explained that he spoke formally in case someone happened to hear them. He then prepared to discuss the next problem he wanted to address, but first wondered whether Yuria would actually listen to what he had to say. Yuria made it clear that she would not unless he stopped using polite speech. Almas adjusted his manner of speaking, and Yuria accepted it. He then asked whether she still wanted him to continue teaching her mathematics. Yuria wondered whether Almas meant that he had grown tired of teaching her. Almas immediately denied it. Yuria suddenly hugged him aggressively, making it clear that she did not want him to leave. Almas clarified that he had not meant that. However, he noticed that her chest was pressing against him and became flustered by the contact. Yuria immediately pulled away and apologized. Almas explained that his job was to teach her mathematics, and she had already learned what he had taught her. Since he had already taught her mathematics, he would feel bad about continuing to receive payment. He meant that she could not expect their current arrangement to continue forever. Yuria admitted that there was not much she could do about that and suggested that Almas ask her father directly. At the castle, the king asked Almas about his desire to stop being Yuria's personal tutor. He wondered what was wrong and whether Almas had grown tired of his daughter. If Almas left, Yuria would be alone again. Almas clarified that he had not grown tired of Yuria and was only wondering how long he would be expected to continue working as her tutor. The king understood his concern and explained that there was no set duration for the position. If he had to give an answer, Almas would remain Yuria's tutor until he had nothing left to teach her. Even after that, Almas could still visit the castle to play. Besides, the king would lose his shogi opponent if Almas stopped coming over. Almas could only laugh awkwardly at the remark. The shogi board had been something Almas himself created. Adelina lacked entertainment, and he had thought that creating a game based on warfare could become profitable. With that in mind, he decided to try creating shogi. However, Lulu had pointed out that the game could easily be replicated, making it unsuitable for sale. Almas was speechless for a moment because it was exactly the same concern Tetra had raised. In this world, there was no concept of patents, so Almas had no way to prevent others from making replicas of his products. Unless a product required a special production method, something like shogi would not work as a commercial venture. Still, he thought the idea could be useful in another way. Lulu found the game too complicated, while Ron could not play it, meaning Almas would have to simplify it. If that was the case, He should have given it to the king of Rosais instead and allowed it to become popular among the upper class. He could gain prestige as the inventor of shogi while earning points with the king of Rosais. Back at the castle, the king invited Almas to take a seat. Almas felt that the king had become more interested in him because of shogi. If he played his cards right, he might even be able to become a guard soldier. Changing careers in another world might not be so bad after all. He would consider it once the children had grown up and become independent. While they were playing, Almas brought up the matter of being Uria's private tutor. He now understood the situation better, but there was something else that concerned him. Aside from Almas, Uria did not have any other friends. He wondered whether this was because she had never been given the opportunity to make any. The king confirmed that Uria had no friends other than Almas. The king explained that he could not go into the details, but Uria had once had a small dispute with a family she had been friendly with. Almas wondered whether Uria was only permitted to befriend people who could benefit her. The king denied that this was the case. As a member of the royal family, however, Uria naturally caused girls from commoner families to become shy around her. Almas knew that Uria was not the type of person to flaunt her authority. The king agreed that she was certainly not that kind of girl. If Uria were merely a princess, it would not be much of a problem. Unfortunately, whether it was a blessing or a curse, she was also exceptionally talented in voodoo magic. Her talent was so rare that it would not be an exaggeration to say it appeared only once in 1,000 years. Once Uria became an adult, the plan was for her to become the chief priestess. Almas was struck by how showy such a position sounded and wondered whether it was really something he was supposed to know. The king explained that everyone in the country recognized Uria's talent, so there was no problem as long as Almas kept the information to himself. More importantly, Uria was the king's only daughter. Her future husband would become the future king of Rosais, making her position highly significant. Naturally, ambitious people sought to obtain that position. Uria was sensitive to people who approached her with such motives. In other words, those who were unaware of Uria's position were the ones she preferred. Almas wondered whether Uria could hide her identity and make friends with the townsfolk. The king explained that this would also be difficult. At the very least, there was no one in the streets who did not know Uria. Due to security concerns, traveling outside the capital was also not feasible. Despite her appearance, Uria was actually quite shy, making Almas's case a lucky accident. Her desire for the medicinal plant had been stronger than her shyness. Almas thought about the matter and considered whether there were any reliable children whom Uria did not know. He eventually came to a conclusion and suggested his village to the king. The king paused before recognizing it as a brilliant idea. Almas was surprised and wondered whether it was really acceptable. Raymond reacted with concern and questioned whether his brother was truly certain about sending Uria to the Griffin Forest. The king reminded Raymond that he had previously approved the forest as a safe place to visit. Raymond recalled that he had indeed said so. There was no problem regarding safety because he had previously had a voodoo magician transform into an owl and scout the area. The king was shocked that Raymond had used soul riding and questioned whether such a technique was too risky, especially in the Griffin Forest. Raymond hesitated before continuing his explanation. Soul riding was a technique in which a magician's soul borrowed an animal's body to reside in, making it extremely dangerous to the magician's life. In this case, however, the magician's soul had returned safely to his own body, confirming that the forest was safe. Furthermore, Almas had not been lying about his encounter. He had genuinely conversed with the griffin, giving Raymond further confirmation that the area was safe. The king wondered what problem remained. Raymond pointed out that the forest was unmarked and that there could be no guarantees. He also questioned whether there was really a need to insist so strongly on Uria making friends. The king paused and realized that Raymond had misunderstood his intentions. He was not sending Uria into the forest merely to make friends. His actual intention was for her to become friendly with the griffin. Raymond was shocked by the king's seriousness. The king considered it worth trying, while Raymond nervously drank from his cup and admitted that he seemed to have been too naive in his thinking. The king then brought up Almas and mentioned that he had personally taken a liking to him. If Almas wished, the king would even take him as a vassal. Raymond agreed that Almas was exceptional. At such a young age, he was familiar not only with numbers but also with Christian, and there was no child like him anywhere in the kingdom. Raymond wondered why they should not give such a capable boy some land. The king chuckled and remarked that if that were the case, Raymond would need to find a place for Almas to become someone's son-in-law. Raymond then wondered whether his own family name was included among the possibilities. The king laughed and added Raymond's family name to the list as well. The two of them shared a laugh. Meanwhile, back at the village, Uria enthusiastically greeted everyone and introduced herself, explaining that Almas was always taking care of her. As a result, Uria was welcomed into the village. She became the village's first official visitor. She was already acquainted with Ron and Rosewood and properly greeted everyone. Almas noticed that Uria was becoming nervous, Soyeon raised her hand and wondered what kind of relationship Almas and Yuria had. Yuria responded by hugging Almas and claiming that they were lovers. Everyone was shocked by the declaration and immediately reacted to it. Almas urged Yuria to stop making such jokes. Tetra asked Almas whether the claim was true, leaving him alarmed. Almas explained that Yuria was merely playing around and warned her not to say such strange things. Yuria admitted that she had only wanted to tease Almas for a little while, but then wondered whether Almas would mind if she actually wanted that kind of relationship. She turned around and began walking away. Suddenly, someone stomped on Almas's feet. It was Tetra, who glared at him angrily. Almas told her that it hurt and urged her not to get angry. At the village, Tetra stomped on Alma's foot before turning her back on him. Almas's foot hurt, and he could not understand why she had to be so angry. Just then, he noticed someone nearby. A man remarked that being popular was difficult, leaving Almas surprised when he realized that the man was Balton Pompey. Balton took a drink of his booze and wiped his mouth. Almas looked at him cluelessly before glancing toward the children. Since Balton was Yuria's guard, Almas had expected a larger security detail. Balton explained that he had heard there was no need for one, which demonstrated how much trust the king placed in Almas. Almas wondered whether that was really the case, considering that Balton was skilled enough for the king to allow him to protect his only daughter by himself. Balton dismissed the compliment, calling himself merely an alcoholic. He pointed out that it would be more convenient for Almas if he neglected his duties, though it would become troublesome if the king found out. Almas denied that was the case. However, in his thoughts, he knew there was something he was hiding, and it concerned Tetra. When he looked at her, she still appeared angry. Tetra was a close acquaintance of the king of Rosais, being the daughter of Lagos Ash, Tetra Ash. If the king learned that she was there, he would surely come to retrieve her. Personally, Almas wished for Tetra to return to the Rosais kingdom because he believed she would be happier there. However, Tetra herself did not want to return. She did not want to become part of a political marriage. If Balton discovered Tetra's identity, it would be bad. According to Tetra, the age for a social debut was 12, so Balton should not have known about a 10-year-old Tetra at that time. Almas figured that it did not matter for the moment since Balton was drunk. Balton then brought up Yuria and looked toward her and the villagers while scratching his head. He wondered what Almas intended to do with Yuria. Almas explained that he planned to teach the people in the village how to use voodoo magic. Balton questioned whether that could really be considered a game. Almas pointed out that it was impossible for Yuria, who preferred poisonous grass to flowers, to play normally with people her own age. Balton agreed with him. In his thoughts, Almas wanted to give the village various forms of independence. He could teach them mathematics, but voodoo was something he could not teach himself. In this world, knowing about voodoo was necessary. Some of the girls could potentially become voodoo magicians. Although males might be unsuited for voodoo magic, learning at least how to counter curses would still be helpful. The lessons would also benefit Yuria herself, as teaching others would allow her to deepen her bonds of friendship. Balton then revealed that although he was a guard, he was also a commoner, so there was no need for Almas to speak politely to him. Almas accepted this and understood. As they walked through the forest, Almas remarked that Balton had done well to become a guard. Balton explained that the king of Rosais did not care about a person's status. Anyone with the necessary skills could be promoted. Balton was certain that once Almas grew older, they would try to recruit him as well. Almas was currently 14, while the minimum age was 17. Balton explained that, at the very least, Almas could become a government official. If he played his cards right, he might even be granted territory. Almas felt that Balton was exaggerating, but Balton pointed out that Almas could tell the king that his country was in such an unstable state that it needed help from an outsider. The king was clearly expecting a great deal from Almas. In his thoughts, Almas considered that becoming a government official might not be so bad, though that would have to wait until after the people of the village became independent. It reminded him of his goal of living as a powerful family in another world. Balton then looked toward the girls and wondered whether they were really keeping up with the voodoo magic lessons. Almas assured him that they were, just as they had been able to keep up with his mathematics lessons. Balton was shocked to learn that Almas was also teaching the children mathematics. Almas added that the top students were even better at it than Yuria. Balton stared at the children with his jaw hanging open. Almas further revealed that one of them could speak Carishian, and that same child was also teaching the others how to read and write. Balton was stunned to learn that the lessons were being given to everyone. The village had so many children who could read, write, and do mathematics, while also learning voodoo magic. Balton could only wonder whether Almas was some kind of genius at training people. Almas, meanwhile, wondered whether Ron and the others also had the opportunity to become bureaucrat. He asked Balton whether they could hope to serve the court as well. Balton explained that it would ultimately be up to the king, and that they could only hope and see what happened. Balton then faced the fields and decided that he should get to work as well. He asked whether it was true that Almas did not have to set aside land for their field. Almas paused as he realized that Bolton was not merely Uria's guard. He had also come to observe the village. Almas explained that dividing the fields would decrease the yield of each crop. Bolton wrote the information down. Almas also asked Bolton to report to the king that the method was his idea. Bolton understood and then asked about the strange farming tool. Almas explained that the one resembling a strange comb was the Kenkokuki, a winnowing machine. Bolton wanted to know what it was used for, so Almas explained its purpose. Bolton was shocked by everything he learned, from the crop rotation style of farming to the Kenkokuki and the winnowing tool. The village seemed like a treasure box overflowing with ideas, and he could hardly believe that Almas had thought of all of them. Almas became embarrassed by the praise and urged Bolton to stop. Almas explained that the Kenkokuki could be introduced easily. Once it was produced, he recommended making its teeth out of metal. Bolton then asked whether he could bring the winnowing machine back with him. Almas told him that if he wanted to disassemble one to study how it worked, he could take the failed prototypes nearby. Better yet, if Bolton provided him with some lambskin parchment, Almas would draw up the designs for him. Bolton appreciated the offer and then noticed that the pottery and charcoal were also being produced within the village. He asked about the smell coming from nearby. Almas explained that it was chrysanthemum. The flower was a natural insecticide, so it was being used to repel bugs. Bolton was once again surprised. An insecticide that could be immediately applied to kill harmful bugs was another piece of valuable knowledge. He could hardly believe how much the village had to offer. In his thoughts, Almas knew that these ideas were also knowledge he had brought over from his previous life. Bolton admitted that he had obtained far more than he had expected. He was neither a warrior nor a civil official, so he did not know the true worth of all this knowledge. Even so, he knew that it was unmistakably beneficial to the country. He thanked Almas for sharing it. Almas asked Bolton to help promote these ideas to the king. Bolton agreed, remarking that it seemed they had not yet been forsaken by the gods. Nearby, Uria called for Almas to leave the drunkard behind and come over to her. Almas walked away, telling Bolton that he had to leave because the princess was calling him. Bolton teased him about having to go because the princess was waiting for her Prince Charming. Uria blushed before angrily shouting at the drunken Bolton to drown in alcohol and die. Bolton merely chuckled and expressed his wish that he could. Almas could only wonder how much Bolton truly loved alcohol. At the castle, the king asked Almas about Uria's progress in making friends. Almas explained that Uria was enjoying herself at the moment. The king opened a scroll and brought up another matter. According to the report Bolton had submitted, he wanted to know whether rotary agriculture was a proven method. Almas finally understood the real reason he had been summoned. Rotary agriculture was famous as one of the factors behind the agricultural revolution that occurred in England during the 18th century, which meant it was indeed a proven method. However, since Almas had never told the king about being reincarnated, explaining how he knew about it was difficult. He therefore stated that rotary agriculture was proven in theory, but because his own fields had not yet completed a full 4-year rotation, he could not say for certain from his own experience. The king then instructed Almas to record the harvest volume and submit the result. Almas agreed. The king also asked whether Almas believed the method could be implemented throughout his country. Almas explained that rotary agriculture was not particularly effective on a small scale. Increasing its scale would require both land and manpower. To accomplish that, they would need to eliminate common land and permit private land ownership. However, thoroughly enforcing such a system among all the powerful families and their farmers would be difficult under Rose's political system. The king took note of the political system of his country. Almas reflected that England had actually undergone a campaign to consolidate land ownership known as the Second Enclosure. Rotary agriculture had succeeded partly because of this enclosure, and he wondered whether something similar could work in Rosais. Rosais also had another problem. Almas pointed out that the strength of the country's soldiers was centered around self-farming. The king confirmed this, explaining that reducing self-farming would directly lead to a decline in military strength. Almas considered how soldiers in the kingdom of Rosais provided their own weapons. As a result, the strength and type of soldier they could become were determined by their financial means. The wealthy could afford horses and become cavalry, while those who possessed spears and shields became spearmen. The poor served as light infantry. Even without spending money on superior weapons, those with sufficient skill could still receive high evaluations. The powerful families could also become wealthier after a war. The king explained that there was no need to aggressively collect land, and that the same was true of the Rosais clan. Wealthy people and those who owned large amounts of land would possess slaves, so the kingdom should aim to introduce rotary agriculture gradually. Almas agreed. He realized that this country was not England. In the kingdom of Rosais, reform could be carried out from the top, beginning with the king, followed by the powerful clans and eventually reaching the commoners. Partial introduction could also prove effective. His village had already been implementing changes carefully, and if they could acquire horses and cows, their progress would accelerate. The king then pointed toward a drawing and changed the subject. Almas wanted to introduce the Senbakoki and the winner to his country. He also wanted to give Almas something as a reward and asked whether there was anything he desired. Almas decided to ask for some farming horses. The king agreed to give Almas 2 horses along with a year's worth of fodder. Almas thanked him, while internally realizing just how valuable horses were. Not every village could obtain even one, yet he had acquired 2 with surprising ease. Furthermore, horses were heavy eaters, and there was a possibility that he would be unable to feed them properly. Having a year's worth of food provided with them was therefore an incredible benefit, exactly what one would expect from the king. In this world, it was equivalent to receiving 2 farming vehicles and a year's worth of fuel. The king then admitted that he had apparently underestimated Almas. Almas was neither merely his daughter's tutor nor a toy maker, but almost like a genius granted by the griffin. Almas felt that the king was overestimating him, but the king assured him that there was no need for humility. He still had more to discuss and wanted to hear Almas' opinion. The king also wanted his brother Raymond to be present and asked whether Almas would be comfortable with that. Almas readily gave him permission to do as he pleased. Raymond soon arrived and greeted Almas warmly, expressing his desire to get along with him. Almas responded respectfully and asked Raymond to take care of him. Raymond then asked whether Almas would once again be his shogi opponent that night, as he wanted to defeat his brother. Almas agreed to play whenever they had the opportunity. Later, at the king's table, the king expressed his confidence that Almas understood the political structure of his country and asked for his opinion. Almas paused before concluding that the system could be considered extremely fragile. The king wanted to know why. Almas explained that the kingdom had been built upon blood relations and territorial ties. During the first generation of those families, they were likely strongly bonded to the country. However, as the second and third generations came along, just as the purity of their bloodlines gradually became diluted, their loyalty to the nation would also slowly erode. Furthermore, the land possessed by these families had not been granted to them by the king of Rosais. Instead, it had been inherited from their ancestors, who had developed and built upon it. The way the aristocrats managed their territories presented another major problem. Both the king's military and financial power were dispersed throughout the land and controlled by the powerful families. As a result, when the kingdom became involved in a major war or large-scale undertaking, responding and making adjustments took time and proved difficult. On top of that, if a powerful family betrayed the country, the kingdom could suffer a tremendous decline in military strength. Almas gave flood control projects as an example. Such a project required the cooperation and interests of nearby towns and villages, yet under Rose's current system, it would be difficult for the king to carry out something on that scale. Marriage ties between aristocrats and foreign nations could also influence the outcome of a war. The king and Raymond exchanged glances at this point. The king then assured Almas that aristocrats in their country were forbidden from entering into marriage relations with other nations. Almas added that the families of the powerful aristocrats should also be included under that law. Otherwise, if one of the most powerful families rebelled, the revolt could potentially spread throughout the entire nation. The king agreed with Almas, and Raymond admitted that they had never considered that possibility. Almas reflected that although marriages between powerful aristocratic families might appear harmless at first glance, a rebellion by one family could potentially spread throughout the entire nation. The king then asked Almas how he thought Rose's political system could be improved. Any opinion was acceptable, and the king genuinely wanted to hear Almas' thoughts. Almas wondered internally whether getting along with royalty really meant they became excited about discussing politics with him. In his previous world, someone in his position would probably have been invited to an expensive, high-class restaurant instead. Almas concluded that, as expected, centralization was necessary. He recalled how, in Japan in his previous life, the Taika reform had shifted the country from aristocratic central politics toward tennocentric politics. Later, the Meiji government's Heihanshiken replaced the various territories controlled by the daimyo with prefectures placed under central control. The concept had been covered repeatedly in history classes during compulsory education. The king revealed that they agreed with Almas regarding centralization. Almas' eyes widened in surprise. Raymond was also genuinely astonished that a child had arrived at the same conclusion they had reached themselves. He then asked Almas what specifically needed to be done to achieve it. Almas believed that, as a starting point, they needed some kind of divine force that clearly separated the royalty from everyone else. He suggested creating a divine myth claiming that the Rosais clan were descendants of the gods. However, Almas was aware that he was not familiar with the divine myths of this world. The king asked whether there was anything else. Almas suggested that, at the very least, tax collection and military authority should be taken away from the powerful families. If they could accomplish that much, implementing further changes would become easier later. However, if he were asked exactly how they could achieve it, Almas was not entirely sure himself. The king paused as he absorbed everything Almas had said. He then revealed that they actually possessed a secret plan for achieving centralization. Almas was surprised by the revelation. Although centralization sounded simple when written as a single concept, he knew that accomplishing it was anything but easy. It was exactly what he would expect from the king of Rosais. However, the king explained that although he possessed such a plan, it was a method he would prefer not to use. He compared it to a cooking method that was not inherently wrong, but whose ingredients eventually became rotten, leaving him with no appetite. As the king held his stomach, his frustration over the lack of human talent in the country caused him physical pain. Raymond immediately became alarmed, but the king assured him that he was fine. Almas was shocked when he noticed blood. Raymond quickly assisted the king and handed him a napkin to wipe his mouth. Once the king had calmed down, he apologized to Almas for allowing him to see that side of him. Almas asked whether the king was suffering from a disease and when it had begun. The king explained that, counting backward, he had been suffering from it for 10 years. Almas was stunned by how long that was. He then wondered whether this was the reason Yuria had devoted herself to voodoo. The king explained that Yuria was trying to heal his illness, although he did not believe that even voodoo could cure it. Almas wondered how much longer the king had, but the king explained that it was not something he could know himself. Almas fell silent. The king then gave Almas an assignment. Since Almas was clever, he believed that he might be able to come up with something that could help achieve centralization. He wanted Almas to complete the assignment before he died. Whether the resulting plan would actually be used was another matter. Almas accepted the assignment and resolved to do his best. Soyen announced to everyone that Almas had returned and that he had brought something amazing with him. Rosewood wondered what it was and whether Almas had really gone to the kingdom of Rosais. Soyen grabbed them and urged them to follow her. Ron quickly understood what she meant and asked her not to push him. Soyen pointed towards something in the distance. Ron realized that they were horses, and everyone ran to welcome their leader back. Almas greeted them upon his return, while Ron excitedly approached the two horses. Almas asked whether it was Ron's first time seeing a horse. Ron admitted that it was his first time even touching one and was amazed by the experience. Rosewood then noticed the girl riding on one of the horses and was shocked to see her. She simply looked away. Rosewood wondered who the girl sitting behind Almas was. Almas introduced her as Ria, a slave he had received. Rosewood questioned why Almas had brought a slave. Almas explained that he needed to practice horse riding, but there was no one in the village who knew how to take care of horses. Handling them required a certain amount of experience. When Almas mentioned this to the king of Rosais, the king granted him a slave who knew how to care for horses as well. Almas considered it no problem to feed one more person. The king had also instructed Raymond to lead Almas there, and Raymond took him there immediately. Raymond pointed out a girl whom he considered suitable and asked the slaver for her name. The slaver identified her as Ria. Almas introduced himself to her and welcomed her, but Ria responded in a foreign language. It was the first time Almas had heard that language. Raymond explained that it was Germanisu. Almas took note of the fact that languages other than Adelian and Carishian existed. Back at the village, Almas explained to everyone that Ria spoke a different language from the rest of them. Whenever they needed to convey something to her, they were to tell Almas instead. He also made it clear that he wanted everyone in the village to treat Ria as one of their own. Rosewood looked uneasy, prompting Almas to wonder whether he was interested in Ria. Rosewood panicked and denied it. Almas simply told him not to be embarrassed. Soyen welcomed Almas back and asked about her souvenir. Almas retrieved something and explained that there was dried meat among the bags on the horse. If Soyen wanted some, she was only to take a little. Soyen sweetly handed the food to Ron. Almas watched them and thought that all 14-year-olds seemed to be curious about love. As an older brother, he felt conflicted by the thought. Perhaps it was simply adolescence. Someone then approached them, announcing that he had taken down a wild boar. Everyone turned toward the person carrying the dead boar. Ron was shocked and wondered who he was. The person laughed and revealed himself to be Graham. Almas wondered how Graham, despite being only 12 years old, had the best physique among them. Graham explained that using a bow required muscles. Someone chuckled, suggesting that it was still too early for them to be surprised. A girl then asked whether she was amazing and whether she was not the best. Almas wondered about the strange dress she was wearing before realizing that it was Lulu. He recognized that the outfit was designed for camouflage. Graham asked Lulu whether she had tracked down the boar using her voodoo magic. Lulu proudly explained that Yuria had said she had a knack for voodoo. Almas was pleased to see how everyone had grown. He also reflected on how poorly suited he was to voodoo. He then told them that they would return and widen their field. With the horses they had acquired, they would aim to make the fields 3 times their current size. Everyone cheered. Almas told Tetra that he was back and asked how the goats were doing. Tetra explained that they had eaten most of the weeds in the wasteland. Almas noted that goats practically ate everything. He decided to leave the horse tilling to Ria and have her work with Rosewood. Tetra wondered who Ria was, so Almas explained that she was the horse's caretaker. Rosewood then helped Ria with the horses. Tetra soon noticed something being dragged behind the horses and asked Almas what it was. Almas explained that he had received it along with the horses. The king had told him that if the horses were going to be used for farming, they would also need a plow and a harrow. Almas had been grateful to the king for providing everything they needed. Almas called out to Rosewood and handed the plow over to him. Rosewood did his best to control it, and he was amazed when it began moving smoothly. The others were astonished by how fast it was. Ron wondered what was wrong with Rosewood, who explained that merely holding on to it hurt before continuing to scream as he struggled with the plow. Soyen was amazed by the difference in speed. Almas explained that such power was to be expected from a horse, making their previous efforts seem insignificant by comparison. Almas then decided that they would prepare the plow for the other horse as well. They also needed to learn how to ride the horses quickly. Soyen reminded Almas that he had mentioned having a new item in mind. Almas explained that he was considering cannabis. Although cannabis carried an image of being a narcotic, Yuria had explained that it could also be used in voodoo, primarily as a painkiller. Almas was disappointed that it was not really used for self-indulgence, although Yuria had heard that other countries used it that way. As a result, narcotics were not really used in the Adelina Peninsula. Yuria had also explained that hemp seeds had high nutritional value. Almas remembered that hemp had been included in Shikimitagarashi in his previous world. Soyen assumed that since hemp was a material used for clothing, Almas wanted to make clothes from it. Almas clarified that they would use the hemp fibers for something else rather than clothing. He remembered that linen strings had existed in his previous life. Soyen admitted that she honestly did not know whether hemp would be useful for that purpose, but she was growing some hemp so they could try it. Almas then remembered that Griffin's support would end in the summer of that year. The taxes they had to pay for the village also grew larger every year. Tetra realized that, at this rate, they were facing a financial crisis. Almas explained that this was precisely why the village needed to produce some kind of product. Soyen realized that this was the purpose behind the hemp. Almas confirmed that there was one candidate for a special product they could produce and led them onward. There were three main mediums used for recording in the Adelina Peninsula: papyrus, sheepskin, and wooden planks. Papyrus was weak and split whenever it was folded. Sheepskin was durable, but insects could easily get into it. Wooden planks were simply short pieces of wood, making it difficult to write long sentences on them. Almas introduced them to a recording medium that was more impressive than all three. It was called paper. Tetra pointed out that most citizens could not write characters, so she could not see much demand for it. Almas explained that they would wholesale the paper directly to places where writing was used. Tetra realized that he was thinking of the king of Rosais. Almas explained that, unlike most people, the work of a country's leaders included recording history. He asked whether Tetra was convinced now, and she accepted his reasoning. Almas then pointed out that, eventually, as everyone pursued their future professions, paper craftsmen would also appear. Tetra agreed. They went outside, where Almas explained that digging a hole along the bank of the small river would create a miniature pool. The material they would submerge in it was tree bark along with the hemp he had brought earlier. Tetra wondered whether soaking the materials in water was necessary. Almas explained that it was simply meant to soften them. Without softening the bark, the black portions of the tree bark could not be removed. After working on it, they obtained the fibers. They were not doing the process seriously yet, but the more precisely it was carried out, the whiter the fibers would become and the better the resulting paper would be. The following day, they would add crushed ash to the water. It would turn into a white supernatant liquid. This was lye. Tetra asked about lye, and Almas explained that what they actually needed was an alkali, but lye would suffice. Alkaline solutions could be used to break down the tissue of living organisms. They mixed the tree bark, straw, hemp, and lye together before boiling the mixture. Soyen looked into the pot and remarked that it resembled a stew. Ron noticed the pleasant smell and wanted to come over and eat some as well. Almas warned him that eating it would give him a stomach ache. He instructed them to wait until the mixture cooled, wash it, and then leave it in the pool overnight. Ron wondered how much longer they had to wait, and Almas assured him that it would only be a little longer. Afterward, Almas praised everyone for their hard work in the fields and told them that they should eat something. Later that night, Almas continued the process. While the mixture was still damp, it had to be pounded with a mortar. Ron volunteered to handle it, so Almas left that task to him. Meanwhile, Almas began making starch from wheat flour. In his previous world, he had only needed to boil the wheat flour to make it. Once the starch was prepared, Almas instructed them to mix the starch glue with the liquid, completing the main material. Someone wondered whether this was already the paper. Almas explained that it was only the base of the paper, with the remaining step being to shape it. Tetra picked up a tool and wondered whether the mold was meant to draw out the water. Almas explained that it was called a paper tray and that, once they had perfected the process, all that remained was to mass-produce the paper. He demonstrated how to pour the mixture onto the paper tray and then shake it to spread the mixture evenly. Tetra found the result beautiful. Almas instructed them to repeat the process several times. They then removed the top part of the paper tray and left the sheet to dry. Tetra asked whether the process was going well. Almas considered the result not bad and explained that from then on, they could produce better paper and make the sheets smoother. Holding the tray, Almas noticed a little dust on the surface and found that the paper was thinner than he had expected. He held the finished sheet out in front of everyone. Everyone was amazed. As they touched the paper, they realized that it was lighter than sheep's skin, easier to write on than wooden planks, and softer than papyrus. Tetra excitedly realized that the paper could be mass-produced and sold. In Almas's mind, however, the praise belonged to the Chinese person who had invented paper. Yet this was the first paper in this world, meaning he could go down in history for introducing it. Excited by the possibilities, Almas decided that they would sell it to the king of Rosais. Almas presented the paper to the king of Rosais. The king walked toward him and touched the sheet before trying to write on it himself. He was impressed by it and praised its quality. Almas explained that their village had produced it and wanted to present some of it to the king of Rosais. The king was sufficiently impressed to declare that he would buy all of it, causing Almas's eyes to glitter. The king then became interested in the paper's production method and asked Almas to reveal it. Almas did not particularly mind, but he wanted to know whether the king could guarantee their profits. The king laughed and treated the matter as a joke. Instead, he decided on another arrangement. For the time being, Almas was to focus on improving the quality of the paper. This was an order from the king. Once Almas had improved the techniques over the next 3 years, the kingdom would purchase the paper collectively. The king also revealed his intention to make paper manufacturing a national industry, but the current quality was still insufficient for industrialization. Until the paper became a high-quality product, he would leave its production to Almas. Because of that arrangement, Almas was not permitted to sell the paper anywhere else. Almas understood. In his mind, the king of Rosais was exactly as expected. The king had even considered the possibility that Almas might sell the information to someone else. Whether it was evaluating his homework or sending Bartolo to observe, the king clearly did not seem to trust people. Even so, because of him, the village's sources of income had become stable. Roughly another year passed, and the time for Griffin's support to come to an end finally arrived. As Almas walked through the forest, he realized that the day had finally come. Through rotary farming, unglazed pottery, charcoal, personal tutoring income, livestock, paper, and protection magic, there had been some twists and turns, but the village had remained relatively stable. Almas wondered what would have happened if he had never met Griffin in that forest. For starters, there would no longer be the divine gift of language. Almas went to Griffin and approached the Griffin. Griffin stood up and acknowledged that Almas had done well to raise everyone without anyone dying. Almas could picture everyone in his mind, but he knew that he had not accomplished everything by himself. Griffin rejected his humility, pointing out that Almas was the one who had gained the support of the king of Rosais and Griffin, while also motivating the children. Almas smiled. Griffin then asked whether Almas still needed the divine production of language. Almas decided that he no longer did. In truth, he still needed it for a little while longer so that he could speak with Rhea, but that was outside his agreement with Griffin. Rhea had also begun to understand a certain level of Adelian. Besides, Rosewood was trying to learn Germanisu. Lulu had even commented that the knucklehead Rosewood was studying passionately, clearly because he wanted to converse with Rhea so badly. Almas thought that the power of love was amazing. Griffin understood and asked Almas to have the divine production of language returned. The Griffin touched its beak to Almas's forehead. Almas felt as though something had been taken from his body. Griffin then urged Almas to show his face around there regularly and suggested that, if Almas felt even the slightest bit of gratitude toward him, he should remember him. Almas looked up at Griffin. Griffin added that Almas should also give him some alcohol on a regular basis. Almas understood. As he watched the village below, Tetra walked behind him. Tetra welcomed Almas back and asked how Griffin was. Almas explained that the Griffin had sent his regards to everyone and wanted them to bring him fruit wine. Tetra then realized that with this, the job Griffin had entrusted to Almas had come to an end. Almas confirmed it. The village was self-sustainable now, and they had done well to make it this far. In the beginning, the place had been completely deserted, but now it might actually be easier to live there than in other places. Everyone had worked incredibly hard. Yes, they truly had. Almas then asked Tetra to gather everyone because he had something to announce. Once everyone had assembled, Almas asked them to listen carefully. He had heard from Uriah and had also confirmed with his own eyes that this year's harvest in the kingdom of Rosais was plentiful. Rosewood wondered why Almas was bringing that up. Almas asked whether Rosewood had been born in the kingdom of Rosais. Rosewood confirmed that he had. Almas then told him that he could now return home to his parents. The same applied to all the others who had been born in the kingdom of Rosais. Almas knew there were children besides Rosewood who had been born in the kingdom of Rosais. If they lost those children, especially Rosewood as one of the older ones, the village would face a labor shortage. Even so, he felt that it did not matter. Children should grow up beside their parents. Now that his agreement with Griffin had ended, any children who could return home should do so. Almas himself had never known his parents, but these children were different. For that reason, he believed that for now, those from the kingdom of Rosais should return there, while the others should also return to their own homes when they became able to do so. Rosewood called Almas's attention and questioned whether he was an idiot. Almas was confused by what he meant. He began wondering whether losing Griffin's support had somehow made him worse at conveying his thoughts. The village was stable even without Griffin's support. Rosewood acknowledged that they loved their parents, but they had already been abandoned once. No matter how desperate their circumstances had been, abandoning them was unforgivable. Ron added that even though they had more food now, their families might not welcome them if they returned. Lulu pointed out that they could even be chased away again. Soyeon added that they might be sold into slavery this time. Rosewood concluded that none of them would ever consider going back. Almas was shocked. Thinking about it now, returning to parents who had already abandoned them meant there was a high possibility that the children would be neglected again. If he had been rational in his decision-making, he should have realized that. Yet he had not considered it. Perhaps, as someone who had been orphaned himself, he had idealized the image of parents in his mind. It was his own complex, and he had recklessly tried to impose his ideas on everyone. Rosewood then revealed that, more importantly, everyone loved Almas. Almas was stunned by the admission. Ron asked Almas not to abandon them and to continue leading them. Graham pointed out that they were all unrelated to one another. Soyeon explained that this was precisely why everyone loved Almas. Ron then asked everyone who wanted to return to their parents to raise their hand. Silence filled the group. He followed up by asking who wanted to continue following their leader from that point onward. Everyone cheered and raised their hands. Almas was startled and wondered whether some of them might simply have been swept up by the crowd. He asked again who truly wanted to return to their parents, but the children continued cheering for him. Almas remembered how, at the beginning, they had cried so much while calling out the names of their parents. The memory moved him deeply, and he wondered why things had turned out this way. Tetra simply explained that everyone there loved Almas, and that was all. Almas's eyes became teary. When Soyeon noticed and asked whether he was crying, Almas turned away and rubbed his eyes, insisting that he was not and would not cry. He then faced everyone again and accepted their decision. He would continue as the village's leader and ask them to keep following him. Everyone shouted their understanding and pledged to follow their leader. Then Almas noticed something strange. Everyone was far too coordinated, almost as though the entire scene had been rehearsed. Soyeon laughed guiltily and teased Almas for seeing through it. Almas was confused by what she meant. Graham explained that Almas had recently been wearing an uneasy expression, something he had heard from Tetra. Tetra then revealed that they had decided to use this opportunity to make Almas cry, an idea that had originally been suggested by Ron. Ron immediately objected, pointing out that Rosewood had been the one most invested in the plan. Rosewood protested that Ron should not shift the blame onto everyone else. As usual, Ron and Rosewood soon began arguing and blaming each other. Watching them, Almas felt deeply moved and realized just how fortunate he was. Almas wondered whether voodoo magic was always that boring. Yuria did not mind him observing, but since they were practicing how to put up a barrier that day, she wanted him to avoid doing anything that might disturb their concentration. Almas noted that the barrier, hexing, and curse dispelling were all difficult to see with the naked eye. There was also the thing from before. Tetra showed Almas something, and he wondered whether they were supplement. Tetra confirmed that they were and instructed him to drink one. Almas complained that they had been made using voodoo magic and doubted whether they were safe. Tetra assured him that they were not dangerous and ordered him to drink it. Almas then noticed that Tetra was wearing revealing clothes that day and wondered whether she was cold. Tetra was not. The goats happened to arrive at just the right time, so Almas gave them the supplement. The goats made a sound and immediately began mating in front of Almas. He was shocked, while Tetra ran away. Later, Almas told the girls what had happened. Yuria scolded Tetra and told her not to start fidgeting. Almas also brought up the time when Yuria had demonstrated a hex that caused a tree to wither. Even after the hex was used, it had taken some time before the tree actually began to wither. A few hours had passed since then. Yuria wondered whether Almas had any complaints about it. Almas asked whether she could make a tree wither in one go. Yuria admitted that she could, but doing so would only waste energy. Almas acknowledged that monster detection was quite useful, and Lulu agreed with him. Yuria immediately declared that Lulu was out. Almas admitted that it was good that voodoo magic had useful applications, but he found some of their practices terrible. having to use the fur of a dead animal to conceal their scent, jumping from roof to roof as training to conceal one's presence, and returning from training looking like a half-wild animal were all examples of things he found awful. Almas wondered whether that was because Yuria had not taught them properly before. Yuria refused to let Almas shift the blame onto her, pointing out that Lulu had been like that from the beginning. Lulu tried to explain herself, but Yuria told her to focus on her voodoo magic instead. Almas then remembered how impressive Soyen's possession technique was, particularly the ability to move her soul into an animal. Yuria acknowledged that the technique certainly had the feel of voodoo magic. Almas imagined how pleasant it must feel to turn into an owl and freely roam across the wide sky. That was the one thing that had made him think it might be nice if he could use voodoo magic. However, immediately after returning from being an owl, Soyen had tried to turn her head 180 degrees, just as she had when she was an owl. It had been a tragic incident. Soyen explained that Ron had intentionally caused it to tease her. Yuria understood how Soyen felt but told her to stop talking about it. In the end, Almas concluded that voodoo magic was rather bland. Yuria then chanted something and produced fire, showing it to Almas as an example. She could create fire instantly because she was the one using the technique, whereas normally it would take more time to produce it. However, since they could simply use flint instead, Almas considered using voodoo magic for such a purpose wasteful. The fire then disappeared. Yuria acknowledged that Almas had a point and that, indeed, it seemed rather pointless. Seeing the fire, Tetra requested that Yuria show it again because there was something she wanted to try. That night, Almas woke up in the middle of the night. He wondered what Yuria wanted with him at such a late hour and went outside. He remembered that Yuria had said earlier that she would be going out that night. She had already received permission from her father and would be going together with that idiot. Almas brought a torch and looked up at the moon, appreciating Adelnia's moon. In this world without alarm clocks, it was his responsibility to wake the children. He sometimes felt as though he had become their mother. Among them, Tetra was the hardest to wake. Although it took considerable effort to get her out of bed, she would become angry if Almas woke her last. After washing his face in the small river, Almas decided that he would begin waking the children. However, as he approached the river, he saw Tetra taking a bath and was startled. Tetra looked around before covering herself. She asked whether Almas had seen her, and he admitted that he had only seen her back. Almas noticed something resembling a birthmark around her hip. Tetra touched the mark and offered to let Almas take a closer look. He examined it and wondered whether it was a tattoo. Tetra explained that it was the family crest of a member of the Ash Main family. Everyone from an influential or royal family possessed one, so Yuria might have one as well. Almas thought about Japan, where he had come from, and remembered that tattoos generally did not have a good impression there. In Western culture, however, tattoos were treated as a form of fashion. He had also heard that having tattoos had been normal during the Yayoi period and in Yamataikoku. In Adelina, meanwhile, they were used to mark someone belonging to a special social class. There might even be some connection between them and voodoo magic. Until recently, Almas had always viewed Tetra as something like a daughter or younger sister. At that moment, however, he felt more like he was watching the growth of a childhood friend or classmate. Tetra enthusiastically revealed that she had made something amazing and urged Almas to look forward to it. Almas accepted and decided to go ahead first. After waking the others and gathering everyone in the middle of the night, Almas asked Yuria whether the thing she wanted to show them had something to do with Tetra's invention. Yuria confirmed that it did and believed Almas would be surprised. Almas admitted that he was already surprised by Bartolo, who was sleeping in the middle of his bodyguard duties while hugging a barrel of alcohol. Rosewood then announced Tetra's arrival, leaving Almas wondering what she was planning to do. Tetra placed a sheet of paper on the table with a symbol drawn on it. The red geometric symbol was the thing she wanted to show everyone. Almas wondered where she had obtained the red color. Tetra revealed that it was her blood and showed him her bandaged finger. Almas immediately considered it dangerous. Tetra assured him that everything was fine and explained that, just as Almas had taught her, she had cleaned the wound with water and alcohol. Tetra then instructed Ron to put out the light, and he followed her request. She placed her hand on the paper, causing it to illuminate. Everyone was amazed by how bright it became. Tetra then urged Almas to try it himself. Soyen pushed Almas forward as he tried to reason that he could not use voodoo magic. He placed his hand on the paper anyway, and it began to glow. Almas was stunned and wondered how he had managed to do it. Yuria explained that two things were necessary for voodoo magic. The first was the power of the soul. There were differences between individuals, but normally, girls possessed greater power. Even among girls, however, there were still differences in strength, and only a small number could become voodoo magicians. Yuria checked whether everyone understood up to that point, and they confirmed that they did. She then explained that the difference could easily be compensated for by bringing voodoo power from outside. This could be done through something such as a sacrifice, blood from a voodoo magician, or a hexing stone. Ron then asked Graham about hexing stones. Graham explained that they were stones containing voodoo power that could normally be mined. Yuria continued her explanation by introducing the second requirement for voodoo magic, the skill and experience of a voodoo magician. Surprisingly, voodoo magic was performed mostly through instinct. Someone as talented in voodoo magic as Yuria would normally use simple voodoo magic without even realizing it. She compared the process to breathing. Even if someone asked another person to teach them how to breathe, only a small number of people would actually be able to explain how to do it. Even so, the process of invoking voodoo magic could be substituted with things such as dancing or singing, which was how voodoo magic had traditionally been passed down. As for first-class magicians, Almas could even use voodoo magic simply by thinking about it. Almas was left wondering what exactly was happening. Yuria realized that she had gone slightly off track and returned to the subject at hand. Pointing toward the symbol on the paper, she explained that the voodoo power came from Tetra's blood, while the invocation of the magic was performed through the geometric symbol. Almas concluded that Tetra had essentially created a symbol representing the entire process of invoking light magic. Tetra confirmed that if it was represented as a symbol, it could be written on paper and carried anywhere. Since the invocation process itself had already been completed, anyone could activate it simply by thinking about it. Almas then wondered how Tetra had managed to create such a symbol. Tetra explained that she had developed it through trial and error, along with the notes she handed to Almas. Almas looked through them and discovered that they were based on arithmetic. Tetra explained that arithmetic was the foundation of everything in this world. Almas was astonished by Tetra's thinking and wondered whether she had somehow come from Greece. Tetra had already decided to name her creation the magic formula. Almas was shocked by the implications. This was far beyond merely discovering equations that might one day be recorded in history book. Tetra had created something truly unbelievable. Yuria reminded Almas that this was precisely why she had told him about Tetra from the beginning. Almas realized that throughout history, voodoo magicians had only been able to create songs, dances, incantations, and various other vague practices. Tetra, however, had transformed voodoo magic into an empirical theory through her magic formulation. Almas wondered whether, if this method were actually implemented, everyone would eventually stop being voodoo magicians. Yuria was certain that would not happen because there seemed to be some forms of magic that could not be expressed through arithmetic. Tetra agreed, pointing out that some things could not be properly explained with arithmetic, such as the square root operator, the ratio between a circle's circumference and its diameter, and even human emotions. Almas realized that the pi number and square root operator had not yet been invented in this world. Of course, he had been the one who taught Tetra about them, but the breakthrough that had transformed voodoo magic had been entirely Tetra's own achievement. Tetra truly was an amazing girl. Lulu was excited by the possibility of combining voodoo magic with magic formulas. Soyeon was equally impressed by the fact that the formulas could be carried around and used even by someone who was not a voodoo magician. Yuria noted that hexing was not compatible with the system, then checked whether everyone understood everything. Ron admitted that he did not understand what was happening, but he still found it incredibly cool. Rosewood quietly pointed out to Graham that there were still forms of magic that could be expressed through symbols and others that could not. Graham realized that this meant the new system might be a completely separate subject from voodoo magic. Yuria explained that the most important part of the magic formula was the arithmetical calculation, so she also believed it would be better to treat it as a separate subject. Tetra then left the decision to Almas. Almas wondered whether it was really all right for him to decide. In his mind, as someone who had lived in the RPG leading nation of his previous world, he knew what direction he had to take. Almas considered what to call the new discipline. He thought about simply calling it magic, but since voodoo magic already existed, he decided that sorcery would be more appropriate. With determination in her eyes, Tetra accepted the name and declared herself a sorceress from that day onward, becoming the very first sorcerer in this world. Almas immediately imagined that her second name would eventually become something like the progenitor. Tetra smiled proudly at the thought. Seeing her behave so much like a girl her age, Almas could only feel increasingly worried. 1 year later, everything in the village was running smoothly. Looking around, Almas noted how lively the place had become. Tetra explained that the village currently had 70 people, which Almas considered quite a lot. Most of them had come from King Firm's kingdom after fleeing the high taxes. The villagers had found them unconscious in the forest and taken them in, and after doing so for a year, their population had grown by 30 people. Graham's group then passed by after finishing the repairs on the roof. Almas thanked Graham and told the group to take a break and have some tea. Tetra explained that among the people they had taken in were 6 adults. They currently had a good relationship with Ron, or rather, the adults had become quite attached to him. Almas observed that the adults possessed greater physical strength and knew many useful life hacks. Tetra had learned how to cook from them and found the experience enjoyable. The introduction of horse tilling had also contributed to the village's development. Thanks to the physical strength of the adults, they had been able to greatly expand the fields, resulting in an abundant harvest. The village now had enough stock to support its population, with production exceeding consumption. Almas considered everything to be fine for the time being and decided to leave the rest to Tetra. Tetra asked him to give her regards to Griffin. Later, in the forest, Almas offered Griffin a jar of wine. The two looked at each other before bowing. Griffin drank directly from the jar with his beak, only to find the amount too little. From Almas' perspective, however, the wine was part of their merchandise for trading and was therefore highly valuable. After drinking, Griffin asked how things had been lately. Almas explained that thanks to Griffin, they were doing well. Griffin insisted that he had not done anything in particular, and although he had complained about the small amount of wine, Almas had still given him highly valuable merchandise. Griffin then asked whether the village was really doing that well and whether the harvest had been good. Almas confirmed that it was. Griffin was glad to hear it. Even though the village had more or less become independent from him, the thought of them dying from impoverishment still gave him nightmares. There was also something Griffin wanted Almas to know. If one day Almas or his descendants ever found themselves facing a predicament, Griffin might be willing to lend them a hand, depending on their attitude toward him and how they asked for his help. Almas had not expected such an offer. He was deeply grateful, though he hoped it would never come to that. Griffin agreed, admitting that such a situation would be troublesome for him as well, and urged Almas to do his best to avoid it. Griffin then flew away and Almas waved goodbye. Later, Almas returned to the village carrying the jar. Tetra greeted him enthusiastically, welcoming him back as her dear one. Almas was shocked by the way she addressed him and smiled as he wondered when the two of them had gotten married. Tetra grabbed him before he could dwell on it and hurried him along, insisting that there was no time for him to stand around dumbfounded. Almas pointed out that she had just said something absurd and asked what the problem was, wondering whether it was an emergency. Ron then frantically called for Almas and led him inside. Tetra urged Almas to look in the room. Inside was a large crowd of people. Almas was shocked. Tetra explained that there were 30 of them. Graham added that the people had arrived shortly after Almas went out, and because they had obediently followed the instructions they were given, the villagers had been left there. One of the newcomers asked whether Almas was the representative of the village. Almas confirmed that he was and asked who the man was. The man introduced himself as Earl, explaining that they were villagers from a particular village within the Kingdom of Firm and that he was acting as the head of their village. Earl explained that all of them had arrived after fleeing the Kingdom of Firm. Soyan asked whether the Kingdom of Firm had been struck by famine again that year. Earl confirmed that it had. The Kingdom of Firm was always vulnerable to curses, causing it to suffer from famine repeatedly. During the founding of the kingdom, many Ash sect voodoo magicians had been executed, leaving very few voodoo magicians capable of creating barriers. An old man added that the taxes collected by the soldiers increased every year. The girl beside him explained that the kingdom would immediately execute anyone who failed to pay. Earl added that, to be honest, they had wanted to flee to the kingdom of Rosais, but crossing the border without being discovered was difficult, leaving them unsure of where else to go. It was then that they heard a rumor about the forest. Almas asked what rumor they had heard. Earl explained that there was supposedly a paradise deep inside the forest protected by a griffin, where abandoned children lived happily. He had never imagined that the place actually existed. Almas clarified that it was not quite the paradise described in the rumor. The people there normally farmed to support themselves. Rosewood asked Ron whether the village had become famous because they sold animal skins in the capital. Ron explained that they were already fairly well known as a village that regularly came to the capital for trade. Lulu added that when they shared food with the people they found unconscious in the forest, those people had also asked them many questions. Soyan pointed out that they had also guided people who had gotten lost in the forest, so perhaps that was another reason they had become known. Almas also realized that introducing Shogi to the king of Rosais had probably contributed to their reputation. The king often spoke cheerfully about Almas and the village. Almas asked the newcomers whether, in short, they wanted to live there. Earl confirmed that they did, and all 30 people desperately begged Almas to let them stay, promising that they would do anything. Almas was surprised and found himself unsure of what to do. 30 people were simply too many to take in, especially with the additional safety concerns. There was always the possibility that the adults could eventually take over the village. Suddenly, one of the women recognized Lulu and asked whether she was indeed Lulu. Lulu was caught off guard by the recognition and immediately looked glum. Almas asked whether the woman was Lulu's family. The woman immediately ran toward Lulu to embrace her, but Lulu shouted at her not to touch her. The woman was stunned by Lulu's reaction, while a man standing behind her questioned what was wrong. Lulu burst into tears and made it clear that it was too late for the woman to act like a real mother after abandoning her. She then told Almas that she was against taking those people in and insisted that they should immediately return them to the Kingdom of Firm. In Lulu's opinion, worsening their relationship with the Kingdom of Firm for the sake of these people was foolish. Ron scratched his head and admitted to Almas that he was against taking them in as well, as he did not like the idea. Rosewood agreed with Ron, pointing out that they had nothing to do with those people. Soyeon, however, was torn over the matter. In the end, she believed that they should take them in because the people had been abandoned and had fled just as they had. Graham agreed with Soyeon, believing that they should help each other whenever one of them was in trouble. Almas noticed that there were also small children among the 30 people. He then asked Tetra what she thought about the situation. Tetra explained that, for now, she was against taking them in because she still could not trust them. There was a possibility that the Kingdom of Firm had sent them as a strategy to take over the village from within, so they first needed to make certain that was not the case. Almas concluded that Tetra would probably agree to taking them in once she came to trust them. With that in mind, Almas decided to go to the Kingdom of Firm himself to clarify the situation. He instructed Ron to watch the newcomers closely while he was away, and Ron assured him that he could count on him. Tetra then decided to accompany Almas since she was not completely unrelated to the problem. Looking at Tetra, Almas understood her reasoning. Almas informed the newcomers that they would be allowed to stay for the time being, provided that they obeyed the village's instructions. The village would provide them with food, but they were warned to make sure they did not do anything suspicious. The people agreed and thanked Almas and the village profusely for giving them a chance, bowing their heads toward Almas. Soyeon urged Almas to be careful during his journey. Seeing Lulu still crying behind Soyeon, Almas was about to say something, but Soyeon assured him that she would take care of Lulu. Almas accepted this and prepared to leave with Tetra by horse. Tetra then asked Almas whether he knew how to ride a horse. At the stable, Almas called for Rhea and confirmed that she was there. He wanted to ride a horse, so he asked her to prepare one. Tetra questioned whether they were really going by horse, and Almas assured her that they were, asking if something was wrong. Tetra pointed out that Almas could not ride a horse. Almas explained that it was not a problem because he would use something, which Tetra asked about. He revealed that it was a stirrup, an item placed on both sides of the horse to provide a foothold. This world already had saddles, but it had no stirrup. Rhea could normally ride a horse without any special equipment, but unfortunately, Almas could not. It was similar to the world he had come from. In the era before stirrups had been invented, not everyone could become a cavalry soldier because it was extremely difficult to use weapons without having a stable place to put their feet. With stirrups, however, even a beginner like Almas could ride a horse with only a little training. He had to be careful with the invention so that it would not cause any militaristic reformation, which was why only Rhea knew about it. Almas also asked Tetra to keep it a secret. Tetra examined the stirrup and recognized that it was made of iron. She also wondered how it had been made. Almas explained that he had asked Yuria to make it outside. Tetra accepted the explanation. Almas then pulled Tetra up onto the horse and had her sit in front of him. Tetra asked him to be gentler and Almas agreed. Rhea waved as Almas and Tetra departed. Later, while they were riding, Tetra brought up King Firm, Roland Firm, and his reputation as an ambitious person. Almas acknowledged that this might be true. Tetra pointed out that everyone had always loved Firm, but Almas observed that Earl and the others had behaved as though they hated him. Tetra admitted that she did not know the truth for now. However, she remembered that long ago, King Firm had been someone who appeared kind. He had also been quite close to her father and to Tetra herself. Tetra had never hated King Firm. Almas understood. As the sun was about to set, Almas decided that they should camp there. They made a bonfire, and the next day they continued their journey. Looking down from above, they saw a village. Almas recognized it as Earl's village, and noticed that it looked exactly as Earl had described. Some people were still there, so Almas decided to ask them what had happened. He approached them and dismounted from his horse. Almas observed that the village appeared more or less empty, and asked what had happened. The two people glanced at each other before one explained that all the villagers had abandoned the place in the middle of the night. A search group was being formed to find them, and the man was clearly annoyed by the situation. Almas asked why the villagers had abandoned the village. The other man explained that the taxes were so heavy that the villagers could no longer pay them. Another man approached and gave the same explanation, blaming the heavy taxation, before asking why Almas and the others were there. Almas noticed that the man had gripped his sword. He then turned toward their bags and took something from them. With a smile, Almas presented himself and Tetra as merchants who were heading north and merely passing through the country. He explained that he had seen soldiers gathering in the village and had become curious about what had happened. He then offered the first man one of the dried fruit. The soldier accepted it gratefully and remarked on how nice it must be to have a horse. The other soldier wondered whether the girl on the horse was Almas's wife. Almas confirmed that she could be considered his wife since they had recently married. He turned toward Tetra, who became flustered before confirming that they had just gotten married and were newlyweds. Almas then asked the soldier whether there was anything he might be able to sell in the area, or perhaps anything the soldiers wanted. Looking at the dried fruits, the soldier explained that they had nothing like that and were already struggling to pay for their own food. The first soldier then asked if he could take 3 slices of the dried fruit. Almas allowed him to take as much as he wanted, and the other soldier asked to have some as well. Almas then asked how they planned to bring back the villagers who had fled, or more precisely, where the villagers had gone. According to the soldier's current investigation, the villagers had fled into the forest. The other soldier referred to the forest as a paradise owned by the griffin and wondered whether they truly believed that. Almas questioned whether it would be too difficult to search for the villagers inside the forest. The soldier explained that it was not particularly difficult because their country also had some voodoo magicians, although there were only a few of them. Almas noticed a woman and a dog nearby. The soldier explained that they would be able to find the villagers in no time by using those dogs. The other soldier remarked on how useful voodoo magic was. The soldier hoped that it could also prove useful in their daily lives instead of being used only for fighting wars. Almas realized that they were using soul riding on the dog and found the situation troublesome. He then asked whether the griffin was inside the forest and whether it was really safe for them to interfere there. The soldiers explained that even if they were terrified, the king had ordered them to do so. They remarked that the king truly did not concern himself with God or divine retribution. From the other soldier's point of view, however, fear of the griffin's divine retribution was not as important as his inability to forgive the villagers who had run away. Although they were going to bring the villagers back, they would be returning them as corpses. The soldiers were scheduled to be dispatched the following day. The other soldier complained that he did not want to do it at all. Almas sympathized with their situation and concluded that there was no way he could sell anything there, so he decided to leave. He gave the soldiers some coins and thanked them for the information before wishing them good luck. Almas and Tetra then rode away on their horse. Tetra warned Almas that the situation was bad because the soldiers would come to their village. Almas agreed that it was troublesome. However, they had obtained what they had been looking for, so they needed to hurry. Upon arriving at the village, Ron quickly slid the gate open. He asked Almas how things had gone. Almas explained that he had confirmed that Earl and the others were innocent. He then asked Ron whether there had been any problems. Ron assured him that there had been none. While dismounting from the horse, Almas said that he would explain what he had just discovered and ordered Ron to gather everyone. Ron agreed, and Almas urged him to do it quickly. Later, everyone had gathered. Almas announced that King Firm's soldiers would be coming to their village the following day. Rosewood stated that, in that case, they would hand the villagers over. Graham questioned whether the people coming to their village were soldiers. Almas confirmed that they were soldiers and explained that King Firm intended to make the villagers an example of what would happen to those who ran away. Silence fell over the group. Almas explained that if they handed the villagers over, King Firm would slaughter them all. The others were shocked, while the sizzling of the fire filled the silence. Almas asked everyone to hear his opinion first. He believed that they could not simply hand the villagers over. The reason was that when King Firm attacked this place, they would need people capable of opposing him. Originally, there had been no road for humans to pass through inside the Ramalia forest. The village was therefore protected by the enormous forest, making it difficult to find. However, since Earl and the villagers had come to this place, the soldiers would be able to locate the village through voodoo magic. If they handed the villagers over, the soldiers would tell King Firm about the village's location. Almas was certain that the king would not simply return peacefully after learning about it. With only 70 people, King Firm might consider the village easy to crush. However, if they took in Earl's people as well, they would have 100 people. With that number, they might even be able to intimidate King Firm into abandoning his plans to attack. Almas then asked the others for their opinions. Ron believed that if his leaders agreed, it would be better to help the villagers. After all, those people had done nothing wrong. Rosewood also agreed that they should help them. Graham shared the same opinion, believing that now that matters had reached this point, everyone needed to work together. Soyan likewise thought that helping the villagers was the better choice, as leaving them to die would be too cruel. Almas glanced at someone, and Soyan looked toward Lulu. Lulu explained that the villagers were her parents and that leaving them to die would be no different from what they had done to her, so she agreed with helping them. Almas asked whether anyone else was against the decision. No one objected. He nodded toward Tetra and concluded that time was of the essence. They needed to go to where Earl and the others were. Almas called everyone together and announced that they had decided to shelter the villagers for the time being. The villagers were surprised and expressed their gratitude toward Almas. However, Almas made it clear that the decision was not set in stone and would depend on the villagers' behavior. Earl kept this in mind. Almas began thinking about King Firm's approaching soldiers and whether he should inform the villagers. He was about to say something when Ron suddenly shouted that something was wrong. Almas immediately went outside and asked what had happened. Ron reported that King Firm's soldiers were coming. Almas frantically asked where they were, and Ron explained that they were in the middle of the forest, a little way from them, but there was no mistaking that they were marching toward the village. Lulu revealed that she had sensed them through detection magic. It was only a matter of time before the soldiers arrived. Earl approached Almas to find out what was happening. Almas explained that King Firm was hunting Earl's villagers and that they would soon reach the village. The villagers gasped in shock. Almas further revealed that, according to his findings, King Firm intended to make Earl's village an example by killing them all. Fear spread among the villagers as they voiced their concerns. Earl urged everyone to calm down before turning toward Almas and apologizing. He bowed, acknowledging that it seemed they had caused Almas even more problems. Almas admitted that the situation was troublesome, but since matters had already progressed this far, there was nothing they could do about it now. Even if they handed all the villagers over to King Firm, Almas did not believe the king would leave them peacefully. Earl was surprised by this and asked whether, in that case, they could join Almas in the fight. Almas welcomed exactly that from Earl. Earl then knelt before him, shocking Almas, and expressed his gratitude for Almas's kindness, assuring him that they would never forget it. Earl also revealed that, although only for a short time, he had traveled around the world for trading in the past and had gained some skill in negotiation. He hoped that those skills would prove useful to Almas. Almas's eyes widened, and he immediately asked Earl to help him. He told Earl to follow him while instructing Tetra to inform everyone who had not been present about what they had discussed. Tetra agreed. That night, in a certain place, Earl asked Almas about the location. Almas explained that it was his home, but there was no time to waste. After clearing the table, Almas asked Earl to explain how he should approach the negotiation. Earl explained that the most important aspect was getting the other party to the negotiating table. Almas needed to make them believe that negotiating was better than fighting. First, they would arm everyone with weapons and meet King Firm outside the village. Almas questioned whether that was truly the right approach. They wanted to remain pacifists, yet meeting King Firm outside the village with everyone armed could be seen as provocative. Furthermore, it seemed more advantageous to repel King Firm from within the village. Earl explained that the enemy's commander was a brilliant general who had never lost. Even in a defensive battle, they would not win. The point was to make it appear as though they were capable of fighting King Firm. Moving a large army through the forest was impossible, after all, so gathering a large force would take time. Because of that, Earl was certain that the soldiers King Firm had brought with him were not numerous compared to them. Enlisted soldiers also could not move through the forest that quickly, meaning the troops must have come from King Firm's own clan. In other words, they were the best of the best and the most valuable soldiers King Firm possessed. Almas cut Earl off, realizing that this meant King Firm would not want to lose even a single soldier in this place. Earl confirmed that this was correct. Almas curled his fist and asked Earl what they should do next. Earl explained that Almas needed to establish terms that both sides could accept while balancing the advantages and disadvantages for each party. Their objective was to survive, so Earl asked Almas what he believed King Firm's goal was. Almas initially thought that King Firm's objective was to kill all of them. Earl corrected him, making it clear that this was not the king's true goal. Almas wondered whether Earl was suggesting that they surrender everyone except Earl, but Earl immediately rejected the idea. Doing so would prevent them from saving anyone. If they handed the villagers over, King Firm would kill them to reduce their numbers and then continue with the rest of them. The king's objective was to make an example out of them. More precisely, he needed them to be dead on paper, but he did not necessarily need them to actually be dead. Almas understood that this meant King Firm needed proof that he had killed the villagers, and Earl confirmed it. It would not be realistic for the king to kill everyone and transport their bodies back, since the corpses would rot along the way. King Firm therefore needed something that would not decay as proof that he had killed the villagers. Earl believed that the king intended to strip the villagers of their clothes and bring those back as evidence. Almas understood that the villagers would therefore need to remove the clothes they were currently wearing, meaning he would have to prepare clothing for everyone. Earl did not think that would be necessary. Instead, he showed Almas a ring. Almas asked about it, and Earl explained that it was merely a cheap bronze ring. He did not know what the custom was in Rosais, but in their homeland, every child was required to make one large ring. When the ring eventually fit their finger, they were recognized as adult. Although the ring would be almost worthless if sold, it was more precious than any jewel at that moment. Earl handed the ring to Almas. Almas examined it and asked about the carving. Earl explained that it was a clan seal. Every village and town surrounding their village used the same seal. Almas understood and agreed that, as Earl had said, the ring would be enough. However, he wondered whether King Firm would truly leave peacefully with only that. Earl explained that it was unlikely, especially because the person they were dealing with was King Firm. Meanwhile, torches illuminated the forest. Someone complained about how troublesome fugitives were and believed it would have been better if they had tried to start a revolution. That way, there would have been no need to chase them, and they could simply have been killed where they stood. Men had gathered around a bonfire. A soldier questioned whether they were really going to kill the villagers, and King Firm confirmed that they were. King Firm ordered everyone to listen. If they excused the villagers for what they had done, more people would follow their example. It was therefore important to show brutality just once and carry it through thoroughly. He also told them not to worry because he had already completed the preparations to invade King Rose's territory. Once they did, they could sustain themselves with pillaged food. One soldier responded nonchalantly, prompting King Firm to notice his attitude. The soldier quickly clarified that he knew how strong their king was. While King Firm bit into their roasted food, he questioned the soldier's attitude. He remembered how happy they had been when they became independent after the king killed Lagos and became king. One soldier explained that their happiness had come from their hatred of the Ash family, since he had always been enslaved under the Rosais family. The other soldier pointed out that Lagos had not been weak in combat, but Firm was simply a brilliant commander. King Firm paused and wondered where that damn kid had gone. He considered allowing Lagos's daughter to escape a blunder. The soldier looked away and insisted that the daughter was certainly dead, since there was no way a 10-year-old girl could survive alone in the forest. She had probably already been eaten by wolves. A magician informed King Firm that they had located the villagers. King Firm stood up and asked where they were. The magician explained that they were a little to the south and that the location appeared to be a village. The dog had traced their scent there. King Firm was surprised that the location was a village and wondered whether it was the rumored village guarded by the griffin. The magician explained that they did not know about that. King Firm admitted that he had always assumed the story was exaggerated. One soldier became concerned about the situation, while another insisted that there was no way they could win against a god. King Firm explained that he had heard griffins did not interfere with human conflict. Furthermore, the griffin's territory was deeper within the forest, so there was no problem. A soldier questioned whether King Firm was certain. King Firm recalled that he had once become lost in the forest. At that time, he had encountered the griffin, which told him that its territory lay deeper within the forest and that he was free to do as he pleased as long as he did not enter it. The soldiers cheered, praising their king. One soldier considered it just like their king to know such things, while another declared that if their king said it was all right, they would visit the griffin's village or whatever it was. The others agreed. That night, King Firm and his soldiers could finally see the village ahead. King Firm observed that it was fairly large. One soldier estimated that there were around 100 people there based on the number of houses and the size of the field. The village had a simple moat and fences, but they appeared intended to repel wolves rather than an army. King Firm noticed someone approaching. Looking closely, he saw that the people appeared to be armed. A soldier wondered whether they should kill the villagers. King Firm mounted his horse and ordered his men to wait. He did not want to lose any of his valuable soldiers there, so he decided to wait and see what would happen. Almas's group continued walking toward them, while one person moved farther ahead. The soldiers realized that someone had stepped forward alone. That person was Almas. Almas continued approaching them and asked what had brought King Firm there. King Firm first demanded to know who Almas was. Almas identified himself as the leader of the village and gave his name as Almas. King Firm explained that he had come to pursue his people who had fled from his country and demanded that Almas surrender them. Almas refused to comply, unwilling to allow King Firm to kill the villagers in front of their eyes. King Firm paused before deciding that they would discuss the matter. However, he ordered Almas to come forward alone. Almas continued walking toward him. One soldier was surprised that the boy was actually approaching them alone, while another admired his courage. Almas remained calm as he considered that everything seemed to be proceeding well so far. He knew that everyone behind him needed to remain calm and avoid doing anything unnecessary. Almas's group watched with concern. Rosewood wondered whether they should move a little closer, but Ron assured him that everything would be fine and urged everyone to believe in Almas and remain where they were. Ron then called on Graham and reminded him that Graham knew what to do if the situation came to that. Graham assured Ron that he could leave it to him. Meanwhile, Tetra desperately prayed that Almas would not die. Almas stood before King Firm and greeted him, asking whether he should come closer. King Firm refused, seeing no need for Almas to do so and believing that Almas would not be able to feel safe if he came any nearer. Almas nodded. King Firm then agreed to hear Almas's reason for refusing the king's demand. Almas reflected that this was King Firm. It seemed the king was at least willing to hear what Almas had to say. Almas explained that his village had a small population, and if the king intended to kill the villagers anyway, Almas wanted to take them in instead. He saw no reason for there to be a problem with that. King Firm refused to agree, stating that he could not simply allow fugitives to escape without punishment. Almas acknowledged that this was true. He then proposed that the king pretend to have punished them and allow them to live. As proof that every villager had supposedly been killed, Almas would hand over their rings, which served as symbols identifying them as villagers. The king was surprised and glanced toward his soldiers. He then proposed that Almas hand over the rings along with everything they possessed in the village. In exchange, King Firm would spare their lives and allow them to keep their clothes, which the king considered a very good deal for Almas. Almas recalled what Earl had told him about the king's personality. Earl had believed that King Firm would try to gain as much benefit as possible from the situation. Almas pointed out that if they lost all their possessions, they would simply starve to death, and he asked whether they could at least keep half of what they had. If the king intended to take everything from them by force, Almas gave a hand signal. Ron recognized it as the signal, and everyone prepared themselves. Almas looked behind him and, seeing that the torch was already burning brightly, made it clear that they would burn everything down. King Firm pointed out that if Almas did that, they would starve to death anyway. Almas acknowledged that this was true and expressed his hope that the king would make the right choice. King Firm did not actually believe that Almas had enough resolve to set his own village on fire, but as he looked toward the forest, he took his time to consider the situation. He eventually settled on 70%. If Almas handed over 70% of everything he possessed, the king would allow them to live. Everyone fell silent. Almas thought that 70% was still quite high, but he believed accepting the offer might be the better choice. He bowed his head in thanks and agreed to hand over 70% of their possessions along with the rings. The king merely made an expression in response. Almas considered the negotiation concluded. Later that night, Almas's group gathered together. As Almas sat down, he first expressed his relief that they had managed to get through the situation without any fighting. Tetra wondered what they should do next. Almas decided that he would first go to meet King Rosais and consult him about the refugees and what he should do from then on. Ron wondered whether Rosais would help them. Almas reasoned that although it was only a small amount, they did pay taxes after all. Moreover, a situation like this was precisely when they could ask for protection, or rather, it would cause serious trouble if Rosais refused to help them. Earl called out to Almas. Almas asked what Earl wanted. Earl asked whether Almas was acquainted with King Rosais. Almas confirmed that he was. Earl then asked if he could accompany Almas, believing it would be better for them to explain the situation themselves. Almas paused, apologizing as he admitted that he still could not decide whether bringing Earl along would be the better choice. For the time being, Earl was to remain there. Earl accepted his decision. Almas was about to leave when he noticed Tetra standing. Tetra intended to go with him as well. Almas asked whether she was certain. Tetra explained that she had been thinking about many things. Almas paused before agreeing to let them travel together. He then entrusted the others to Ron while he was away. Ron assured him that he could be counted on. Later, as Tetra rode on the horse, she felt that it was too dark for them to continue traveling. Almas pointed out that the sun would rise soon and decided that there was no problem with leaving immediately. As they traveled, Tetra reflected on how she had always been running. She had done so because she did not want to destroy her life along with everyone else's. She was also afraid of King Firm. Yet there were people suffering because of King Firm, and Tetra was the only living descendant of the Ash family. Since she had been born into that family, she felt that she had to take responsibility. Almas looked at Tetra and reminded her that her life belonged to her alone. It did not belong to Earl or the others. The responsibility that came with being part of an influential family had nothing to do with deciding how she should live. If Tetra did not want to shoulder that responsibility, there was no need for her to force herself. Tetra accepted what Almas had said, but being part of an influential family was still a part of her life. She did not want to spend the rest of her life running from King Firm. If she wanted to walk her own path, she first had to resolve her problem with King Firm. Almas understood. With that, he had nothing more to say. Ahead of them, the sun began to rise. Almas enthusiastically pointed it out to Tetra. Tetra looked at him before lowering her gaze, then looked at him again. Almas asked her to let him say one more thing. Tetra then expressed her wish for Almas to marry her after she resolved her problem with King Firm. Tetra suddenly exclaimed her desire for Almas to marry her and repeatedly pressed him for an answer in an emotional outburst. Almas was shocked by the sudden proposal and felt that it had come completely out of nowhere. Tetra reminded him that he had previously told her that she was an important person to him. Almas reflected that those words had carried a different nuance, especially since people like Ron said such things more often than he did. Almas suggested that they calm down first, get off the horse and then talk things over. Tetra believed Almas was the one who needed to calm down. They dismounted, and Tetra once again pleaded with Almas to marry her. Almas remained silent. He had always viewed Tetra as a little sister. That feeling was not limited to Tetra either. He felt the same way toward Ron, Soyen, and the other children. He regarded everyone in the village as being more than a best friend and less than a lover. If he had to change the way he viewed them, then he needed to consider what that would mean. Almas explained that if Tetra married him, she would be living with him for the rest of her life. Tetra already understood that. Almas continued by reminding her that marriage was not something she could easily take back. Tetra understood that as well. Almas then pointed out that marriage also meant having children. Tetra's response made it clear that this was exactly what she wanted. Tetra's face turned red as she demanded that Almas give her a simple yes or no answer. Almas agreed to marry her. Tetra then asked whether he loved her, and Almas, now blushing as well, confirmed that he did. She asked whether he thought she was a wonderful girl, and he agreed. She then asked whether he considered her someone wonderful to have as a wife, and he agreed again. Finally, Tetra asked whether Almas would marry her. Almas refused. Tetra was surprised. Almas explained that he could not accept her marriage proposal because, as a man, he could not allow things to end that way. He wanted to be the one to say it himself. Almas knelt on one knee and asked Tetra to marry him. Tetra smiled and happily accepted before rushing forward to embrace Almas. Almas smiled as well. Now that they had agreed to marry, they needed to hurry to King Rose's kingdom. They were still facing the danger of starving, after all. Tetra agreed. Almas then wondered whether accepting the marriage meant that he had somehow raised a death flag and questioned whether he would die soon. Later, in the kingdom, King Rosais acknowledged how difficult their situation must have been. Almas explained that they had lost most of their food and possessions. The king agreed to guarantee enough food for them to survive for a year, with the condition that Almas take care of the refugees. Almas accepted and expressed his gratitude to the king. King Rosais explained that such incidents had happened before near the border of King Firm's kingdom. He was actually relieved that Almas had not burned down his village, since there was no way to collect taxes from villagers who were dead. The king then turned his attention to the cute young lady standing beside Almas and wondered who she was. Tetra stepped forward and greeted King Rosais, noting that it had been quite a while since they had last met. The king was surprised by her familiarity and admitted that he did not remember meeting her before, asking her to explain. Tetra recalled that it had been 10 years earlier, when King Rosais had visited the Ash Mansion in the capital of the Ash territory. She had been there with her father when they welcomed the king. The king immediately became serious and ordered his soldiers to leave. He warned Tetra that if she told any more lies, he would execute her, and he would do the same if she refused to answer his questions. He first asked for her father's name. Tetra identified him as the head of the Ash family, Lagos Ash. The king then asked about her mother. Tetra gave her name as Carishian, Helen Ash. He asked Tetra for her own name as well. Tetra apologized for the late introduction and identified herself as Tetra Ash. King Rosais closed his eyes and murmured that it seemed God had not abandoned him yet. He then asked Tetra whether she could prove her identity. Tetra explained that she had her family's crest on her hip and asked whether the king wished to see it. King Rosais apologized for the rudeness of asking her to remove her clothes and requested that she show him the crest. Tetra turned around and lifted her clothes, revealing the crest. She then asked whether the king had seen enough. The king apologized before asking whether she also had her ring. Tetra confirmed that she had it with her. Almas was surprised, as it was his first time seeing the ring, and wondered where she had hidden it all this time. Tetra explained that the ring was made of gold, and she had felt guilty keeping gold while everyone was in desperate need of money. She had therefore buried it somewhere to hide it and intended to sell it if they ever reached the end of their options. Almas assured her that he did not blame her and was not angry. King Rosais cleared his throat and asked the two of them to stop their couple's quarrel and show him the ring. They agreed. In Chapter 21, Tetra revealed that she also possessed the family seal that the king had given to the Ash family. Almas was unfamiliar with the purpose of the family seal and wondered about it. Tetra handed the seal to King Rosais. Almas still did not fully understand what the seal represented, but from its appearance it seemed to be some kind of stamp. King Rosais examined it and decided to call a crest specialist. The specialist would determine whether Tetra's crest, ring, and family seal were genuine. If they were confirmed to be authentic, they would be returned to her. Tetra understood. Almas checked whether Tetra was all right and she nodded. A soldier then informed King Rosais that the crest specialist had arrived. The king gave the soldier further instructions, after which the specialist called for Tetra and led her away. Tetra parted from Almas and went with them. Silence settled over the room. King Rosais then seriously asked Almas where he had found Tetra. Almas explained that it was far from there, and that Tetra had actually been part of the village for years. The king changed his question and asked how long Almas had known Tetra's true identity. Almas considered that admitting he had always known might leave a bad impression. He explained instead that he had discovered her identity a few years earlier. Under normal circumstances, it was something he would have reported to the king immediately, but Tetra had asked him to keep it secret. Almas apologized for doing so. King Rosais expressed his exasperation but accepted the explanation. He also considered the fact that Almas had sheltered the last survivor of the Ash family and therefore decided not to blame him. Almas thanked the king. The king then asked about Almas's relationship with Tetra. Almas explained that he had promised to marry her on the way there. King Rosais questioned whether Almas truly believed that the daughter of an influential family could marry a commoner. Almas believed that it was possible. He also reasoned that this was why the king intended to make him a noble. King Rosais pointed out that even among nobles there were various ranks. Almas resolved to do his best and at least become a lesser noble. King Rosais quietly worried about what he would tell Yuria. Almas noticed and asked whether the king had said something, but King Rosais dismissed it as nothing. Since it would take some time to determine whether Tetra was truly a member of the Ash family, King Rosais decided to ask Almas about the solution to the homework he had previously given him. The king wanted to know whether Almas had prepared an answer. Almas recalled the homework and realized that it concerned centralization. He explained that he had an answer, although there were still some parts he had not solved. King Rosais accepted that and asked him to present what he had come up with. Before Almas could begin, however, the king decided to call Raymond first. Raymond soon arrived and greeted Almas after their long absence from one another. Almas returned the greeting, and Raymond took a seat beside the king. Almas then presented his answer to the homework concerning how they could achieve centralization. His solution was to use the power of the people. King Rosais and Raymond exchanged glances. The king asked Almas to explain. Almas explained that centralization was a form of government in which national power was gathered at the center, giving it the highest authority over organizing soldiers and collecting taxes. In King Rosas' current kingdom, however, power was divided among smaller regions. To achieve centralization, those regions would first have to be united. Even if they ordered the influential families to surrender their authority over organizing soldiers and collecting taxes, Almas was certain that they would not give up those rights easily. For that reason, he believed they should begin by gradually reducing the political power of the influential families. Raymond then questioned what Almas specifically intended to do with the power of the people. Almas explained that if the political power of the people increased, the political power of the major families would decrease in proportion to the population. Raymond and King Rosais fell speechless. King Rosais then pointed out that the king's own power would also decrease, asking whether Almas understood that consequence. Almas acknowledged that, under normal circumstances, the king's power would decrease as the people's power increased. However, he explained that this was where the most important part of his plan began. The king of the kingdom had a duty to guarantee the rights of its people. In other words, the kingdom existed to protect its people. If the kingdom protected their lives and possessions, it could stand alongside the people against the influential families. The king considered the idea carefully. Raymond understood the basic principle behind it. Normally, increasing the people's political power would create a ruler versus subject situation. However, by establishing the kingdom's duty to protect its people, the conflict could instead become one between the influential families on one side and the royalty and people on the other. Almas continued by explaining that this change in the relationship would make any attempt by the influential families to gain more political power appear as oppression. At the same time, the king's duty to protect the people would provide him with a legitimate justification for opposing them. Raymond found the idea extremely interesting. The king, however, pointed out that such a situation would not arise unless the people themselves demanded it. Almas agreed, but he believed that the possibility of a conflict between the classes was quite high. The reason for this was the influence coming from the Federation of Cities, Caristia. The Carishian Federation was composed of city-states. Simply put, it had no king and had adopted a republican system. Almas noted that republican systems differed from nation to nation, but setting that aside, such a system could appear especially appealing to the Adelnia people, who were accustomed to monarchy. He therefore believed that some Adelnia people had already begun taking an interest in the ideology. The king pointed out that this was still only Almas's prediction. Raymond disagreed. He believed that, as Almas had explained, there were already signs of Carishian influence. He referred to the greatest disaster they had experienced, the uprising led by Robert Firm. Raymond had been investigating the reason behind the uprising and had discovered that it appeared to have occurred because of support from the lower-class people. From that perspective, they could even say that the uprising had succeeded in establishing the kind of centralized government they were currently aiming for, although the circumstances remained frustrating. The king understood the point and acknowledged that, viewed from that perspective, the situation did not seem entirely bad. He then wondered how they would deal with the influential families after reducing their political power. Almas explained that once those families lost their political power, they would no longer be capable of causing an uprising. The families would be summoned to the center, made nobles of the robe, and assigned responsibility for the bureaucracy. The problem would be preparing the conditions necessary to bring them there. Almas believed they would need to provide inheritable land, offer to take over or even pay off the enormous debts owed by families burdened with them, and prepare a place resembling a court where the families could retain some degree of political power. Almas believed that these measures should be sufficient. The king questioned whether building a court would not move them further away from their goal of centralizing the government. Almas explained that the court would be located at the center. The most important point was to gather all political power in one place. However, concentrating all political power in a single location would also reduce their speed of response. Giving the families limited autonomy to govern their own lands would therefore reduce the cost of maintaining the centralized government. There would still be the matter of deciding what to do after the centralized government had been established, but Almas believed they could consider that gradually at a later time. The king found the idea genuinely interesting and turned to Raymond for his opinion. Raymond, however, became so impressed with Almas that he proposed making him his adopted son. Raymond asked Almas whether he would become his adopted son. Both Almas and the king were surprised by the sudden proposal. Almas could hardly process the idea of becoming an adopted son. Raymond immediately embraced the idea of becoming Almas's father from that day onward. The king called Raymond out for making such an absurd request without warning and ordered Almas to leave the room immediately. He also told Almas to forget everything that the fool Raymond had just said. Almas hurried outside, still surprised by what had happened. Raymond's proposal meant that Almas would be taken into his family as a son. It had been so sudden that Almas did not know what to think. For the moment, he decided to wait outside for Tetra. Meanwhile, the king demanded to know what Raymond had been thinking. Raymond explained that, simply put, he was considering making Almas the next king. The king was stunned and questioned whether Raymond had lost his mind. Raymond assured him that he was perfectly sane. It might not be the best option, but Raymond believed it was the second best option. The king pulled a chair over and sat beside Raymond. He acknowledged that Almas might be a genius, but Almas was still a commoner. On top of that, he was only a 16-year-old boy. Raymond admitted that this was true, but then asked his brother who he believed should become the next king. The king explained that Raymond was first in line, but unfortunately, he had no children. Because of that, Uria's husband would become the next king. Raymond summarized the situation as meaning that Uria's fiancé, Rigor would become king. He argued that if the king truly intended to make that man king, it would be better to choose a random person from the street instead. Raymond also reminded the king that he had said something similar before. The king acknowledged that Raymond had indeed said it, but dismissed it as drunken nonsense. After the loss of the Ash family, the Dibble family had become the second strongest family in the country. Rigor was the head of the Dibble main family. Raymond admitted that Rigor truly was a fool. According to the members and retainers of the Dibble family, Rigor was careless and violent. His mind seemed to contain nothing but alcohol, women, and money. Raymond refused to serve under such a man. The king explained that if he attempted to place someone else on the throne, the country would fall apart. Raymond saw no problem with that as long as they won and suggested that they could simply remove the Dibble family entirely if necessary. He also questioned whether the king was truly willing to give Uria to Rigor. Rigor had killed his own wife twice. The king admitted that he disliked Rigor Dibble and did not want to give his daughter to him. However, if their marriage went well, it could unite the Rosais and Dibble families. If that happened, centralization could also be. Raymond interrupted the king's thoughts by questioning whether he genuinely believed Rigor would cooperate with them. The king fell deep into thought as he looked toward the window. He agreed that Rigor Dibble was not a suitable person. That much was true. However, he still wanted to know why Raymond had brought Almas into the matter. Raymond explained that Almas was the right person for the position. First, Almas possessed the spiritual influence that came from being the son of the Griffin. That alone would be enough to dispel dissatisfaction over his commoner origins. Second, Almas had a good personality and no special bloodline background. Unlike Rigor Dibble, this meant they would have full political rights over Almas. Third, Almas possessed a deep understanding of centralization and an exceptionally creative way of thinking. He was also extremely knowledgeable, although Raymond had no idea where Almas had acquired all of that knowledge. Almas was still young, but Raymond believed that with enough experience, he would undoubtedly become a great king. More than that, Raymond intended to personally shape Almas into one. With that, Raymond considered his reasoning complete and asked whether the king had any remaining doubts. The king wanted to know what Raymond intended to do about the planned unification with the Dibble family. Raymond explained that unification with the Dibble family had been impossible from the beginning. Since Almas had arrived with Tetra Ash, they should instead continue with their original plan to unite with the Ash family. Fortunately, it appeared that Almas and Tetra were in love, so they only needed to marry. Both of them would still remain under their jurisdiction. The Ash family had already lost its political power, but the person marrying into the Ash family would be the adopted son of the king's brother. They would then prepare this young man, who was also the son of the Griffin, to become the family's next successor. Raymond was confident that no one would oppose the arrangement. In fact, he believed everyone might even be happy to accept it. Afterward, Almas would marry Uria. Through this arrangement, the unification of the Ash and Rosais families would be completed. The king was about to respond but stopped himself. Instead, he agreed with Raymond's decision to take Almas as his adopted son, although he had not yet decided whether Almas would inherit the throne. Raymond thanked the king and decided that they would hear Almas's own opinion on the matter. A soldier called for Almas outside. informing him that the king wanted to see him. Almas agreed and entered the room. Before Almas could say anything, Raymond eagerly urged him to sit down. Almas took a seat in front of the two brothers. Raymond resumed their previous discussion and asked Almas whether he wanted to become his adopted son. Almas sought clarification, confirming that becoming Raymond's adopted son meant Raymond would become his father or adoptive parent. Raymond confirmed that this was correct and waited for Almas's thoughts. Almas considered the proposal before asking Raymond for his reasoning. Raymond explained that after hearing Almas's way of thinking, he had come to regard him as a wonderful man, although Almas remained doubtful that this alone was sufficient reasoning. Raymond then decided to tell him the truth. The real reason was that Almas was the Griffin's son. Raymond wanted Almas to marry Tetra Ash and restore the Ash family to power. He had no intention of forcing Almas to marry her immediately. Instead, he wanted Almas to come to his territory first and study many things before eventually marrying Tetra. Raymond then emphasized the power of stories and legend. Almas could only stare at him as Raymond explained the legend of a young princess who lost her family's land because of a rebellion, was saved by the son of the Griffin, and eventually married him. Together, they restored her family to power. Raymond considered it a truly dramatic story. Raymond waited for Almas's response. Almas asked whether he could give his answer after consulting with his other friends. He also needed to tell them about Tetra. Raymond had no objection, but the marriage between Almas and Tetra had not yet been made formal. Because of that, he asked Almas not to tell anyone about it for the time being. Raymond would then wait for Almas's favorable answer. Tetra called for Almas. Almas asked whether she was finished. The king informed Almas that they had confirmed Tetra was indeed the daughter of the Ash family's patriarch, and he therefore returned the proof to him. Almas understood and prepared to take his leave with Tetra. The king agreed. Tetra then asked Almas whether they were returning to the village, and Almas confirmed that they were, since they also had to inform the others. They began their journey back to the village. Upon returning, Almas called out to Ron and announced that he was back. From the watchtower, Ron welcomed Almas and announced his return to everyone. Their friends soon came to meet them. Graham remarked that they had taken quite a while this time, while Lulu wondered whether Almas had somehow secured their food. Almas explained that they would receive enough food for 1 year in exchange for taking care of the refugees, or at least that was what they had been told. As a result, he would have the refugees begin working from that day onward. Everyone cheered, and Earl thanked Almas. Almas then explained that, aside from that matter, there was another important issue they needed to discuss. He asked Ron to gather the usual members, and Ron agreed. Later, everyone was shocked to learn that Tetra was the Ash family's princess. Tetra apologized for keeping it a secret, but everyone assured her that she had no reason to apologize. Everyone had a past they wanted to keep secret. Soyeon admitted that they would have been happy if Tetra had told them sooner, while Lulu emphasized that Tetra was still Tetra. Rosewood added that the truth did not change the fact that they were all friends, and Ron agreed. Tetra was deeply moved. Almas then revealed that he had received an offer from the Duke, the brother of King Rosais, to be adopted into his family. Everyone was surprised. Ron found the news of Tetra being the Ash family's princess quite astonishing, and Almas's announcement that he would become part of the Kingdom of Roses' royal family made the situation even more remarkable. Ron regarded it as great news for their leader. Rosewood praised Almas as expected of him, while Soyeon realized that this would make them royal retainers. Lulu resolved to work harder on her voodoo training. In Tetra's mind, Almas becoming part of the royal family meant that she would become a princess as well. Meanwhile, Almas's eyes widened as he watched everyone celebrate and cheer. It was not what he had expected. In his previous world, the friends he had grown up with as though they were family had left the orphanage one by one for various reasons, and each time it happened, he had felt lonely. Almas asked whether they would not try to stop him. Soyeon wondered why they would do that. Almas explained that he might even say he was happy about it. Lulu noticed that something was troubling him, and Ron wondered whether Almas did not want to be adopted. Almas clarified that it was not that he did not want it. Rather, if he became part of the royal family, he would have to live far away from the village. He and Tetra would both be separated from everyone. Ron and Soyeon laughed at his concern. Soyeon explained that they might have less time to see each other, but that did not mean they would never meet again. She also believed that Almas was not someone who would remain in that place for the rest of his life. Ron agreed and reaffirmed that they were cheering for Almas. Almas's eyes widened again. He thanked them and realized how blessed he was to have such good friends. He then decided that he and Tetra would spend one night in the village before leaving again. For a while, he would leave the place in their care. If any problem arose, they were to gather the usual members along with the refugee representative, Earl, and discuss the matter together before making any decisions. Ron agreed and everyone cheered for Almas. Almas greeted everyone good night, and the others walked away happily. Soyeon remarked to the others that Almas was amazing. Graham wondered whether they might be able to meet the king someday as well. Ron pointed out that there were etiquettes they had to follow, which might be too much for them. Lulu felt that it was rather lonely that Almas and Tetra would be leaving first. Ran asked Lulu what she meant. If Almas and Tetra went ahead of them, they simply had to catch up with them. By doing so, they could eventually claim to be their retainers. For now, they had to protect the village while Almas and Tetra were gone. The others agreed. Almas heard their agreement from inside his room. The next day, in the kingdom, Almas informed Raymond that he had accepted the offer to be adopted. Raymond accepted his decision and asked Almas to start calling him Papa from that day onward. Almas found that hurdle too high to overcome right from the start. Raymond admitted that he had been joking and told Almas to call him father instead. The king apologized for disturbing the father and son moment and explained that he had something to say. Tetra Ash would have to go with Boros Ashperm. Boros was an influential figure in the current Ash family, and Tetra would learn from him how to become part of a powerful family. Tetra understood. Raymond then grabbed Almas and took him along, explaining that they had many things to do. Almas complained about his father hurting him. Raymond dropped several scrolls onto the table and explained that Almas first needed to learn etiquette. However, it was quite common for people from influential families to be unable to write, so proper etiquette was not actually that rigid. Simplified, it was essentially about knowing how to use one's words, and Almas had no problem in that regard. Almas explained that he had learned it from Tetra. Raymond assured him that he could take it easy from there. A welcome party for Almas would be held in a month, so he needed to remember everything before then. When they arrived, the kingdom was already bustling with activity. Raymond reminded Almas that it was the day of the event. Although its main purpose was to introduce Almas, it was also being held to celebrate Tetra Ash's safe return. It was a major event celebrated throughout the country. Almas also needed to show his face while remembering his position as the son of the Griffin. Almas understood. People gathered in the square, and everyone was socializing. Almas spent his time entertaining the people until he finally went to the back to rest for a while, exhausted from the activity. Yuria greeted Almas after a long time without seeing him. Almas realized that this was indeed the first time they had spoken to each other since he had gone there. Yuria confirmed this but remained surprised by everything that had happened. Almas had become her cousin, while Tetra was actually the daughter of the Ash family. The circumstances were difficult to believe. Almas considered it a long story. Afterward, Almas wondered how people viewed him now that he was part of the Rosai's family. Yuria explained that everyone was happily welcoming him. After all, Yuria, Raymond, and her father always spoke well of Almas. Yuria then looked toward a group of people and noted that they were different from the others. Almas asked about them. Yuria explained that they were the Dibel family. They apparently disliked the fact that Almas had joined the Rosai's family despite being born a commoner. They also expected the story about Tetra to be fake. Yuria was certain that they disliked everything happening at present, especially since the Rosai's family was growing stronger through the spiritual influence of the Griffin and the Ash family was being revived through Tetra Ash's return. Almas noticed that 1/3 of the influential families absent from the celebration belonged to the Dibel family. He remembered that, if he was not mistaken, Yuria was engaged to Rigger Dibel. Yuria's mood immediately changed, and she questioned why he was bringing it up. Almas explained that he was merely wondering what Yuria thought about the matter. Yuria stomped her feet and repeatedly expressed her hatred of Rigger. She was certain that if Almas met Rigger in person, he would understand. Almas accepted her explanation. Yuria sighed and wished that she could have been engaged to Almas instead. However, the noise of the celebration drowned out her words. Almas asked whether she had said something, but Yuria denied it. Tetra then called Almas over and introduced him to Boros, the head of the Perm family, a branch of the Ash family, Boros Ashperm. Almas began introducing himself when Boros suddenly burst into tears. He thanked Almas for protecting Princess Tetra and revealed that he had always regretted being unable to protect Lagos from Firm. All of the retainers then pledged their loyalty to Almas. Almas thanked Boros and assured him that he understood, urging him to wipe away his tears. Almas handed Boros a handkerchief, and Boros wiped his face with it. Almas reflected that the Dibel family hated him while the Ash family looked up to him. However, he was now part of the Rosai's family. They were no longer in a master-servant relationship, so even if the Ash family pledged their loyalty to him, the situation was different. Almas looked disgustedly at the handkerchief. Boros then asked whether Almas was going to marry Tetra. Yuria's eyes widened, and Tetra quickly covered Boros's mouth, warning him that he could not say that yet. Yuria asked Almas whether it was true that he was going to marry Tetra. Almas confirmed that it was true, but the marriage had not yet been made official, so it would be troublesome if the information leaked out. Yuria understood and promised not to tell anyone. Almas and Tetra fell silent. Yuria smiled and congratulated both of them. Almas looked at her. Someone then approached Almas, having heard that he was the one who created Shogi, and expressed his hope of having a match with him. More people gathered around Almas. As the crowd surrounded him, Almas noticed Yuria walking away. After the celebration, Almas and Tetra began their journey back to the village on horseback. Tetra admitted that she had never expected that she would be unable to return to the village for an entire month. Almas explained that things would calm down somewhat from then on, allowing them to return to the village more often. He wondered how everyone was doing. Tetra agreed that it was nice, but she then glanced behind them and glared at Bartolo, who was drunk. She asked Almas whether he understood the situation. Almas also glared at Bartolo. Bartolo explained that he had expected Almas to be promoted to the same noble class as himself, only for Almas to skip the noble classes entirely and become part of the royal family in one step. He wondered whether Almas understood how he felt about it. Almas acknowledged that he understood and asked Bartolo to keep some distance from them. Tetra complained about the smell of alcohol coming from Bartolo and wondered whether he was really useful. Almas was unsure, but he continued wondering how everyone in the village was doing. Tetra hoped that they were not fighting among themselves. Bartolo explained to Tetra that such a situation would be impossible. The villagers had suddenly gained more people while their leader was absent, which was practically an invitation for conflict. As they neared the village, they heard someone shouting for them to stop, followed by the declaration that they were not her parents. Almas immediately recognized the voice as Lulu's. Realizing that something was wrong, he urged everyone to hurry. In Chapter 23, Lulu shouted for them to stop, insisting that the two people were not her parents. Almas entered the room and asked what was going on. Soyen called for Almas and Tetra. Later, Lulu's parents were kneeling before them while Soyen and Tetra remained silent. Ron welcomed Almas, who then asked him to explain the situation. Ron explained that while Almas had been gone, Lulu's parents had attempted to contact her and caused some trouble in the process. Afterward, they had discussed the matter as Almas had ordered and decided to prohibit Lulu's parents from approaching her, but they continued doing so. Almas asked Lulu's parents whether they had an excuse. Lulu's mother begged him to reconsider. Almas pointed out that they should understand how much Lulu was hurting simply by seeing their faces. Lulu's mother attempted to explain her reasons, but Almas cut her off. Whatever her reason might be, it did not matter. They had both thrown Lulu away, and that fact would not change. Even if Lulu forgave them someday, it was not something they could decide for themselves, so they needed to give up. Someone suddenly entered the room. It was Earl, who came running inside. He grabbed Lulu's father and demanded an explanation for why they had broken the rule. Lulu's father attempted to reason with him, but Earl punched him. The others were shocked. Earl then grabbed both of Lulu's parents by the head and forced them to bow down together with him. Almas warned Lulu's parents that if they did it again, they would be exiled. They acknowledged that they understood. Bartolo reflected on the incident and wondered how Almas would resolve it. However, it seemed that Almas had been saved by the refugee named Earl. Ron asked Almas about it, and Almas agreed that Earl had saved him. With the village now having more people, rules and penalties had become necessary. However, if Almas personally delivered the punishments, it would cause distress among the refugees. If Earl handled such matters in his place, he could resolve the situations with the least amount of side effects. Almas then turned to Ron and thanked him for taking care of the place while he was gone. Ron was flattered and admitted that he had actually left most of the responsibilities to Earl during Almas's absence. Almas told Ron that he needed to do his best even when Almas was not around. Ron apologized. Almas then asked Bartolo what he thought. Bartolo proposed digging a canal and pit around the wooden fence. If King Firm's soldiers wanted to reach the village, they would have to pass through the forest roads. In that case, they would only be able to send around 100 to 200 soldiers at a time. Assuming they had a number of soldiers equal to their villagers, Almas should be able to face them. Almas pointed out that although the village's population was around 100, they had only about 40 men available. He opened the map and considered the consequences if the village were destroyed and the enemy passed through it. Beyond the village lay Rose's capital, so he questioned whether there was any possibility that the enemies might actually aim to invade it. Bartolo explained that if the enemies brought enough soldiers to attack the capital would definitely see them coming. If they did not have that many soldiers, however, the capital had enough strength to fight them back. Almas then asked Bartolo how high his position was in the military. Bartolo explained that, for that year, he had taken command of the anti-Firm Kingdom military front. Almas and Tetra were surprised. Almas was amazed that Bartolo held such a position, having assumed that Bartolo's job was simply carrying alcohol around. Bartolo explained that he would rather drink the alcohol than merely carry it around. Although he had taken command of the military front, he did not have the authority to decide whether the border could be crossed. In reality, Bartolo was a famous general. Tetra remarked that Bartolo's position did not fit his image, and Almas found it difficult to believe as well. Bartolo proposed having a mock fight with training swords, confident that Almas would understand once he witnessed Bartolo's excellent swordsmanship. Almas agreed. Tetra questioned whether he was serious. Almas confirmed that he was, since they might have to fight King Firm sooner or later, making it a valuable experience. Almas also considered that if Bartolo truly was a great general as he claimed, the fight would serve as a good indicator of whether his blessing from the king would be capable of facing a trained soldier. Almas took up his weapon. Bartolo prepared to begin and allowed Almas to attack whenever he wished. Almas decided not to hold back and attacked with his sword, but the weapon broke upon striking Bartolo. Bartolo was caught by surprise and was thrown to the ground, leaving Tetra amazed. Almas concluded that, as expected, a wooden training sword could not withstand his strength. Bartolo repeatedly denied what had happened in disbelief and wondered exactly how strong Almas was. Almas demonstrated his lower body strength by stomping his foot, crushing the ground beneath him. Bartolo remembered that Yuria had once told him that Almas possessed several blessings. Almas observed that Bartolo remained remarkably calm even after witnessing his strength, which meant that Almas likely could not defeat him by relying solely on his blessings. Even so, Bartolo did not want to face Almas in battle. Ron then confirmed that Bartolo was a soldier. After hearing this, Ron turned to Graham and Rosewood and asked whether they had heard the same thing. Rosewood confirmed it. Ron, Graham, and Rosewood bowed before Bartolo and pleaded to be allowed to join the military. Rosewood explained that they wanted to be capable of fighting alongside Almas. The three of them continued pleading with Bartolo, moving Almas deeply. Bartolo agreed to hold a training session soon and promised to test them. He then sought Almas's approval. Almas readily agreed and encouraged his friends to give it their best. The soldiers stood in formation. Yuria asked Almas what he thought of their army, explaining that they were all conscripts rather than mercenaries, which gave them high morale. Almas found the sight impressive, especially with 1,000 people moving in formation. He explained that he had come because he heard Ron and the others would be having their test that day, but Yuria explained that they were taking the test as part of their training and were currently practicing archery. They both looked toward the soldiers. Almas noted that everyone was working hard and then asked where Graham was. He soon spotted him. The soldiers watched the recruits, waiting to see whether their arrows would hit the bullseye. The first arrows missed, and disappointment showed on the soldiers' faces. They questioned the recruits about being hunters and expected them to at least hit the target. One recruit complained that the bow was too large. A soldier concluded that they seemed to have some bad new recruits this time. Another soldier pointed toward Graham and identified him as the big young man with the small eyes. He questioned Graham's way of holding his bow, explaining that an arrow would not fly straight if he held it that way. He then told Graham to go ahead and try shooting. Graham simply looked at the soldier and released his arrow. It struck the bullseye. The soldier was surprised but dismissed it as beginner's luck. Graham shot again, hitting the bullseye once more. The soldier's jaws dropped when he repeated it with another bullseye. The soldier finally acknowledged that Graham was really good, and Graham thanked him. Seeing this, Almas told Yuria that Graham only needed to be accepted for his bow. Yuria then pointed toward the elite knights on the other side. Everyone there was sparring with one another, completely focused on their practice. Almas asked whether they were the elite knight. Yuria pointed toward Ron and Rosewood, who were partnered against each other. They charged at one another and exchanged attacks. Yuria noticed that they were moving differently from the others and wondered about it. Almas considered their movements good. In his previous world, the director of the orphanage had taught Almas kendo. Because of that experience, Almas had also taught some kendo to Ron and Rosewood. Upon spotting Almas, Bartolo welcomed him. Almas observed that the people there were making many unnecessary movements and that his two companions were stronger. Bartolo immediately challenged that assessment, insisting that they would find out who was stronger once they sparred. Almas cheered for Ron and Rosewood. The next person was then announced and called forward. Ron introduced himself. The soldier regarded him as merely a young man and found himself less fired up because of it. Ron apologized. The soldier decided to go easy on him and instructed Ron to strike from above. The soldier questioned whether that was all Ron could do and urged him to put more power into his swing. Ron swung his sword and something happened. The soldier fell to the ground. Ron followed with his final blow and disarmed him. Yuria cheered for Ron's success. Another soldier became angry with Ron, pointing out that the first soldier had only been warming up and questioning why Ron had done that. Ron stuttered as he tried to clarify that they were having a mock duel and wondered whether the duel had not even started yet. The soldier called Ron a cheeky brat and offered to become his sparring partner if Ron truly wanted a fight. The other soldier told the angry man to stop and simply fight the next person as he was supposed to. Rosewood introduced himself. The soldier asked whether Rosewood was Ron's friend and immediately began attacking. He moved forward, but Rosewood was able to defeat him as well. The other soldiers were surprised that another one of them had been defeated. A large soldier standing behind them called the situation embarrassing and ordered the other soldiers to move aside. He then challenged Ron to fight him next. Ron accepted. The large soldier was known as the strongest person there after Bartolo. Later, the other soldiers acknowledged that they had lost another one and urged everyone to defeat Ron and Rosewood regardless of who they were. Before long, however, they realized that it was impossible. The two were simply too strong. Even Almas could not believe what he was seeing. He and Bartolo looked at each other. Almas understood from Bartolo's expression that he believed the situation was caused by how strong Ron and Rosewood were, while Almas himself thought it was because the knights were too weak. Still, Almas had a strange feeling that there was another reason for what was happening. He turned toward Yuria. Yuria apologized, admitting that she found it amusing to see Almas so surprised. She realized that he still had not figured it out. Almas wondered what she meant, so Yuria decided to explain and asked him to accompany her. They went somewhere near the capital. Yuria showed Almas a picture and explained that his blessing of the king increased his physical power as the number of people who accepted him as their leader increased. However, the blessing had evolved during the past year. Almas was surprised by this revelation. Yuria explained that his blessing now also increased the power of people who had sworn loyalty to him. Although the increase was not as great as the one granted to the original owner of the blessing, it enhanced the physical strength of the men and the magic power of the women. The explanation immediately cleared up Almas's confusion. It explained why the boys in the village possessed strangely superior physical strength. There were other unusual things as well, such as no one having caught a cold during the past 4 years. Almas had never intended for them to swear loyalty to him, however, so he wondered why Yuria had decided to tell him about it at that moment. Yuria revealed that she had actually planned to remain silent until Almas discovered it himself because she found it amusing. However, Almas had not realized it, leaving her no choice but to tell him. Yuria then reminded Almas that he knew she was engaged to Rigor Dibel. She revealed that she would marry Rigor and make him the king, after which she would have to give birth to the next successor. Because of that, she had decided to tell Almas then, as she would have no other opportunity. Seeing Almas's expression, Yuria sighed, having expected him to be more surprised. She realized that remaining with Almas any longer would only cause her determination to waver, so she decided that this would be their last time together. Yuria kissed Almas. Almas was shocked when she embraced him, while tears filled Yuria's eyes. She confessed her love for Almas, even though it was a hopeless love, and asked him to take good care of Tetra. Before leaving, Yuria wanted Almas to remember one thing: she had been the partner of his first kiss. The king looked surprised. Yuria and Almas had not realized that the king and Raymond were watching from a distance. The king closed his eyes, while Almas remained dazed by what had happened. The king instructed Raymond not to tell Yuria anything unnecessary. Raymond agreed and noted that even the king knew Almas was the better choice. Yuria must have been in despair, since any girl would be devastated upon being told to marry someone who had killed his own wife. If the king truly wished for his daughter's happiness as her father, then he should allow Yuria to marry Almas. Raymond also knew that if Almas became king, centralization would work well with the king's support, and Yuria would be happy as well. The king, however, pointed out the reality of the situation. If they declared that Almas would become king, exactly how many powerful families would follow him? There was no doubt that the Dibble family would start a rebellion, and Rigor Dibble would not remain quiet. If the kingdom descended into civil war, it would be cut to pieces and taken by outsiders, just like the pie before them. Raymond countered that rather than carrying along a rotten piece, it would be better to remove it and disinfect the wound at once. The king acknowledged the point but stated that it was still too soon to draw conclusions. Almas or Rigor remained the two options, and Raymond reminded the king to keep that in mind. The king understood. Later, at the village, Tetra asked Almas what he was doing. Almas decided that it might be acceptable to tell her that he was making black powder. In Almas's mind, black powder had first been developed in China and was the oldest form of chemical explosive. Sometimes, the advancement of technology brought sadness, and he had seen more than enough of that in his previous life. Because of that, he did not want to bring any military technology into this world. However, as long as they faced a threat from King Firm, he had no other choice. With the current production capabilities of the Adelnia Peninsula, Almas was considering making a weapon that resembled a tetsuhou. Tetra hugged Almas from behind and asked how he made it. Almas explained that he only needed charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. He had made the charcoal himself and scraped out only the high-quality portion. The golden crystals were sulfur, which was fortunately abundant because of the many volcanoes in the Adelnia Peninsula. As for potassium nitrate, he extracted it using the old soil technique. He might not have been able to mass-produce it, but he could at least extract it. The process involved gathering black soil from beneath the flooring and placing the soil inside a jar with some water. The water was then boiled while being mixed with charcoal. After that, it was filtered through the paper they had made and left to dry. Tetra recognized that it was a weapon and wanted to see it. Almas explained that it was still under development, so he could not guarantee its power. He had Tetra move away for a while before slamming the stone. Tetra covered her ears. Almas explained that the substance could produce that sound with only a small amount. If it were placed inside a container, it could injure or even kill people. Without a container, it would still explode if ignited. Tetra was amazed. Almas explained that adding pebbles, iron splinters, or ceramic pieces would complete it. The only thing left was the igniter. Almas then turned to Tetra and asked whether she could make a magic circle that produced fire. Tetra replied that creating only a spark would be easy. Almas asked her to make some. 1 month later, Almas greeted Bartolo. Bartolo welcomed him and asked what he was doing there. Almas explained that he was thinking of a strategy to defeat King Firm. He asked Bartolo if he knew about the phalanx. Bartolo knew it more or less. Almas explained that, simply put, the phalanx was a strategy in which soldiers took shields and spears and charged into the enemy. They used their left hands to raise their shields and protect themselves as well as the comrade on their left. Because of this, the right side was weaker, so elite soldiers were normally placed there. Almas asked whether his understanding was correct, and Bartolo confirmed that it was. Most of the time, the opposing forces ended up trying to push each other, leaving the battle to be decided by luck and morale. Almas then considered using cavalry to attack from the sides, since the phalanx was exceptionally weak on both flanks. Bartolo acknowledged that it was a good idea, but they could not simply use the cavalry they currently had for that purpose. The stirrup Almas had invented was indeed a great invention, but that did not mean anyone could suddenly become a cavalry soldier. Almas then proposed making the enemy concentrate their strength on the left side so they could attack its weak right side. Bartolo immediately understood Almas's idea and regarded it as something befitting the son of Griffin. Almas told Bartolo to stop, as he was already tired of hearing that. Bartolo then noticed something and asked about the bottle. Almas revealed that he had actually come there to show Bartolo that very thing and asked him to accompany him for a while. Almas brought an axe and struck a tree with it, choosing the tree for the demonstration. He then placed the cylindrical object into the cut. After lighting it, Almas ran away while covering his ears. A loud explosion followed, leaving Bartolo shocked as the tree fell. Almas asked what Bartolo thought. Bartolo wanted to know how Almas had done it, so Almas explained it to him. Bartolo was amazed by Almas's invention and nearly praised him again as the son of the Griffin. Bartolo then asked whether Almas could make more of it. Almas confirmed that he could. Bartolo became convinced that they could definitely defeat Firm. Almas regarded victory as a given, since failing to win would only cause trouble. Bartolo noted that Almas was as strict as ever. And so, Almas and the others prepared themselves. Just like that, 2 years passed. King Firm sat in his chair when someone approached him. The king asked what had happened, and the man reported that another noble family had switched sides to the Ash family. There was also a group among the people who wished for the Ash family to rule again. King Firm was annoyed by the news. It had been 2 years since Tetra Ash had been found and the Ash family reinstated, yet more and more people continued to rebel. He regretted not killing her when she was still a little girl. Another soldier pointed out that it was still suspicious whether she was truly Tetra Ash or not. King Firm considered the distinction irrelevant, as she remained troublesome even if she was a fake. Another soldier then sought King Firm's attention and handed him a scroll. The king's expression changed as he read it. The message had come from a spy he had placed inside King Rose's kingdom, reporting that King Rose had collapsed. The soldiers were shocked, but King Firm did not believe that King Rose was about to die. It was merely his chronic attack. In King Firm's opinion, the succession problem had been weighing heavily on King Rose. Even so, King Rose would be unable to command his army, giving them an opportunity to invade. One soldier pointed out that they did not have enough provisions. King Firm questioned the concern, since the purpose of going to war was to secure provisions in the first place. As long as they had 3 days' worth of supplies, they could plunder the rest. They would capture the forest and launch a surprise attack on the palace. Another soldier warned that doing so would invite the Griffin's divine punishment. King Firm dismissed the concern by pointing out that David had passed through there just before. That meant they could pass through the area as well. As for their greatest problem, the refugees had already helped them discover a small road through which their soldiers could pass. Another soldier wondered whether there was any possibility that the village from before had received special treatment from the Griffin. King Firm denied the possibility. If the village had received any protection, the Griffin should have appeared when they extorted enough food from the villagers to leave them at risk of starvation. They would take over that village and use it as a forward base for a direct attack on the capital. If the villagers refused to surrender it, they would simply conquer it. That would also allow them to obtain provisions, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. King Firm ordered the Budo magicians to be summoned and instructed them to spy on that village and King Rose's capital. The soldiers obeyed and raised cheers for the king. Meanwhile, in another place, 3 people had gathered while biting leave. They prepared to begin soul riding within a magic circle. Using birds as their vessels, they began the soul riding. One of the birds flapped its wings and flew above Almas's village. The The sole rider inside noticed that the village's defenses had been improved compared to before. No matter how she looked at them, the defenses had clearly been constructed to repel humans. She could not see any soldiers. Another bird was flying nearby. The sole rider determined that there seemed to be no problem and prepared to return. Suddenly, something approached her. When she looked toward the other bird, she saw it being killed by an eagle. The sole rider wondered why it had to happen at that moment. They had been attacked by their natural predator, and she needed to escape quickly. If she were killed while using possession, she would die as well. Then a second bird appeared. The sole rider realized that something was wrong. A third eagle arrived. It was the third one. The sole rider wondered why eagles would move in a group and suspected that they might be the enemy's voodoo magicians. She made the bird fly away faster. There was no way a small village like that could have 3 powerful voodoo magicians. Perhaps they had come from King Rose's kingdom. Whatever the case, she had to escape and report back. She flew a little farther toward the forest and finally escaped the village. However, just as she was about to get away, an arrow struck the bird. The magician collapsed, and all 3 magicians fell to the floor. Meanwhile, Graham announced that he had caught one of the birds. Tetra complained as she continued biting the bitter leaf, frustrated that Graham had been the first to catch one. Lulu, who was holding an eagle, chuckled and revealed that she had carried out the first surprise attack. Soyeon had executed the second one. Lulu and Graham high-fived each other. Soyeon then wondered whether killing the birds had been all right, since doing so would make King Firm regard them as enemies. Almas explained that King Firm had already sent spies, which meant they were enemies in his eyes regardless. Almas added that he had sent Earl to report the situation and request reinforcements from King Rose. Since he had given Earl a fast horse, Almas was certain that Earl would return soon if he worked hard. Immediately afterward, a running horse arrived. Ron announced Earl's return. Earl revealed that King Rose had suffered a chronic attack and collapsed. He had made the round trip on horseback without resting. Almas offered Earl some water and asked about the reinforcements. Earl reported that they would arrive in at least 3 days. The reason was that King Firm's soldiers had begun moving as soon as King Rose collapsed. There were also disturbing movements from the neighboring kingdoms and among some of the nobles. The enemies intended to divide Rose's military forces and create chaos in the capital. Earl told Almas that he wanted to hold back King Firm's soldiers for 3 days, following Raymond's instructions. Almas told Earl to stop imitating his papa in that manner. He admitted that, to be honest, he wanted them to send 500 men from the capitals. A soldier reported to King Firm that he had gathered the 200 soldiers as commanded and asked how many should be dispatched first. King Firm ordered him to send 3,200 soldiers and instructed him to take 200 soldiers to capture the village. Afterward, they were to attack the capital if possible. If they could not, they were to lure out the Rosais Kingdom's army instead. Meanwhile, King Firm would take command of the remaining 3,000 soldiers and attack the capital from the front. The soldier pointed out that bringing out 3,200 soldiers essentially meant an all-out war. On the other hand, the enemy could muster up to 15,000 soldiers at most. King Firm questioned why the soldier was worried. The soldier admitted that it would be a lie to say he was not worried. King Firm then decided to tell him something interesting. He had made Rigger Dibel promise to stay away from the fight in exchange for the crown. In other words, the second largest power in the Rosais kingdom, the Dibel family, would not make any move. The soldiers were surprised by the revelation. King Firm knew that Rigger had no intention of actually obeying them. Rigger would look for an opportunity to betray them and make Rosais indebted to him. Furthermore, they had sent alliance requests to 2 neighboring countries. According to King Firm's information, their soldiers had already been sent to the borders. The Rosais family therefore had to divide and send its army there to prevent any fighting from breaking out. With the Dibel family taking no action, the maximum number of soldiers Rosais could muster was about 10,000. With King Rosais being sick, that number was reduced to about 7,000 at most. They would then have to send at least 2,000 soldiers to each neighboring country. In the end, they would have only 3,000 soldiers available, and the number would not exceed 4,000 at most. The soldier realized that if those calculations were correct, the difference would only be about 1,000 soldiers, meaning their king could definitely win. After all, that was how their king had come this far. The soldiers became confident that they could win and cheered at the prospect of raising a toast to victory in Rose's palace. Back at Almas's village, soldiers could be seen approaching from afar. Almas recognized them as King Firm's army and noted that there were 200 men, exactly as Soyeon had reported. Soyeon panicked over the situation and wondered what they should do. Lulu considered attacking the soldiers with eagles. Almas ordered everyone to remain calm. Everyone in the village was protected by the moat and rampart. He also told them to stop using soul riding, since they would die if their birds were shot down. Almas urged everyone to stay calm and follow the plan. Tetra noticed that someone had stepped forward. Almas agreed and realized that King Firm was not among them. The man who had stepped forward was most likely the one in command. The man shouted for the gate to be opened and demanded that they hand over their food, promising that they would at least spare the lives of Almas's group. Almas looked at Tetra before refusing the army's demand. He then ordered everyone to begin the plan and move to their assigned stations. Their main battle would take place on the rampart around the gate, since Almas was certain that the enemy would come straight for it. Ron wondered why the enemy would attack the gate directly and clash with them head-on. From his perspective, sneaking around and infiltrating the village would have been more effective. Breaking through the wall and moat would require them to sacrifice some of their men. Almas explained that the enemy's original objective was Rosai's palace, so they would want to minimize their losses at the village. He then pointed toward the weapons being carried by the marching army. Ron noticed that the enemy really was coming from the front and wondered what the huge object they were carrying was. Almas explained that the huge object was a battering ram, a siege weapon made specifically for breaking gates. The enemy's shields were also troublesome, and it seemed that throwing stones at them would have little effect. Soyen pointed toward a certain area. The army continued marching, but suddenly several soldiers fell into a pitfall trap. The soldiers realized what had happened, while Soyen was pleased that their trap had worked. Ron proudly regarded it as their first attack against the enemy. Almas explained that although the trap only contained sharpened wood, they had filled the bottom of the pit with spears. Any soldiers who fell inside would certainly die. He hoped that, if possible, the enemy would fall into at least one more pitfall trap. Looking ahead, Almas saw the army quickly place a wooden cover over the pitfall before continuing their march. Tetra noticed how quickly the soldiers had closed the hole, while Ron realized that they would not fall into another trap. Almas reassured them and ordered Ron to begin the stone bombardment. Ron agreed, and their forces began hurling stones at the enemy. Almas threw one with all his strength, causing several soldiers to fall. He explained that whether thrown by Ron or himself, their stones were powerful enough to break through those shields. Tetra noticed Graham standing on the watchtower and shouting a warning about incoming arrows. Graham warned everyone to get down as arrows began raining from the sky. Almas ordered everyone to take cover. The arrows eventually stopped falling. Almas decided to trust the shields they had placed along the rampart. Screeches and groans could be heard, indicating that some of their people had still been injured. Graham told Almas that he would deal with the enemy archers. After one of the arrows was intercepted, the enemy realized that someone was on the watchtower and ordered their soldiers to kill the archer. Stones immediately came flying toward Graham. Graham quickly hid and realized that the enemy had focused their stone bombardment on him, preventing him from even peeking out. Ron became alarmed as more arrows began flying toward them, accompanied by shouts from the battlefield. Almas ordered everyone to pull the injured people back while they still could and have the next person take their place. He also instructed Ron to continue throwing stones at the enemy without stopping. Ron continued hurling stones, but Soya noticed that their attacks were having little effect on the enemy. The enemy, meanwhile, could continue firing arrows at them as much as they wanted. Ron then reported that the main gate had been taken. Graham and Lulu were holding the gate as the enemy pushed forward. Graham informed Almas that they were being forced back toward their position. Almas ordered everyone to remain calm and assured them that everything would be all right. Tetra called out to Almas. Almas already knew. The soldiers shouted as they rammed the gate with the battering weapon, repeating their efforts again and again. Behind the gate, Soyen warned Almas that it would be destroyed at this rate. Almas told everyone to hold on and not act yet. Everything was still going according to their plan. Tetra assured Almas that everything was fine and urged him to wait just a little longer. The soldiers began crowding together near the gate. Almas then ordered Ron to give the signal. Ron waved the flag, and Rhea immediately notified Rosewood that the signal had been given. Rosewood began the ignition. Sparks could be heard, and after only a second, a huge explosion followed. The soldiers disappeared in the blast. Lulu celebrated their success, while Tetra called for Almas's attention. Almas regarded the operation as a huge success. Although the plan had received Bartolo's approval, they had not had any free time to test it beforehand. The plan had been to surround the village with a moat and dig a hole in front of the main gate. Bartolo had questioned how Almas intended to enter or leave the village if he dug a hole in front of its only exit. Almas's solution was to build a bridge as camouflage. They would construct a wooden foundation and cover it with dirt while keeping the empty space beneath it intact. A tunnel would then connect that underground space to the inside of the village. The space would be filled with a large amount of explosives and jars full of oil. Bartolo understood that the purpose was to make the enemy gather in front of the gate before setting everything off. Almas intended to deal with all of them at once and cut off their route in a single strike. They were therefore more than welcome to lay siege to the village. Back in the present, the smell of explosives filled the area. Ron covered his nose. Almas decided that they would help as many survivors as possible. The scene looked like something from hell. Suddenly, a surviving soldier lifted a log and prepared to throw it at Almas. Rosewood warned Almas, who quickly turned around and struck the man with his shield before kicking him down. Ron checked whether Almas was all right. Almas confirmed that he was, but reconsidered his earlier decision. Before helping the survivors, they needed to make sure the soldiers would not attack them again. Almas then heard one of the surviving soldiers coughing and recognized the voice. He felt that he had heard it before and asked whether the man was their commander. The man did not answer. Almas gave him a choice between providing information and losing his head. The man finally accepted and agreed to tell Almas everything.